The road stretched out in front of us like a black ribbon cutting through the hills, endless and deserted. My friends and I, Tom, Sarah, and me, David, had set out from Indianapolis on a late summer Friday evening, excited for a weekend in the Appalachian Mountains. We had no real plan except to drive, explore, and camp somewhere off the beaten path. Tom was behind the wheel, blaring classic rock. Sarah was scrolling through a travel app for campsite suggestions, and I was keeping an eye on the dwindling daylight. Everything felt normal, even mundane, until the sun slipped behind the horizon and the mountains swallowed the sky. We decided to leave the interstate after a couple of hours, opting for a scenic back road Tom had read about online. It was supposed to be quiet, remote, and picturesque. It was all that, and more. The trees grew so close to the asphalt that our headlights barely penetrated the darkness. The air grew thick with mist, or maybe fog, I couldn't tell. The only sound was the gravel crunching under the tires, and occasionally the distant call of a night bird. Sarah commented on how eerily quiet it was, but we laughed it off, thinking it just felt different because we weren't in the city. Around 11 p.m., we came to a fork in the road. One path was well paved, leading toward the mountains. The other was a narrow, overgrown track, barely more than a dirt trail, lined with dead trees. Tom, ever the thrill-seeker, suggested we take the dirt trail. "Come on, it'll cut 20 minutes off the drive," he said with a grin. Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowed. "I don't know, Tom. This looks abandoned, like no one has been here in years." But curiosity got the better of her, and we turned onto the trail. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. The forest closed in around us, and the mist thickened until our headlights were swallowed. The Jeep's engine sounded unnaturally loud in the enclosed space, every crunch of rocks against tires amplified. I tried to focus on the road, but it felt wrong somehow. Shapes moved in the trees just beyond the lights, shadows flitting between trunks, too quick to be animals, too deliberate to be tricks of the light. I mentioned it, and Tom laughed nervously, suggesting I was imagining things. Sarah wasn't laughing. She kept muttering, "It's too quiet, too empty." We had been driving for about 20 minutes when the Jeep hit something. Not a deer or a rock, something larger, softer. Tom slammed on the brakes, heart racing, and we all stared at the road. There was nothing there. No blood, no body, no debris, just a slight indentation in the dirt. "Probably a raccoon," Tom said, though his voice lacked conviction. Sarah refused to get out and check. I stayed silent, my stomach twisting. Something about the moment felt wrong, like we had crossed an invisible boundary we shouldn't have. We continued, slower now, every sound amplified by the silence. That's when the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind. Low, almost like voices coming from the trees on either side of the road. Sarah froze in her seat, whispering, "Do you hear that?" Tom and I nodded, uneasily. The Jeep rattled over another patch of gravel, and the whispers grew louder, almost forming words. We couldn't make sense of them, but they seemed urgent, almost pleading. "Let's just keep going," Tom said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. After what felt like hours, a dim light appeared through the mist. Relief washed over us. It was a small cabin, glowing faintly from the inside. "Finally, someone's here," Sarah said, her voice shaky. We slowed, debating whether to stop. Tom was eager to check if anyone could direct us to a campsite. I was hesitant. Something about the cabin felt off. It was too small, too secluded, and its windows were dark except for a faint flicker. The fog curled around it, almost moving like it had a life of its own. Still, we parked a few feet away and approached. The porch creaked under our weight, the boards old and rotting. I could smell mold and something sharp, metallic, like rust or blood. No one answered when we knocked. I peered through a window and saw nothing but shadows. But then, movement. Just for a second. A figure, hunched, watching us from the corner of the room. I jerked back, my heart hammering. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We should leave. Now." Tom, against our protest, tried the door. It opened with a groan. The inside smelled worse than the porch. Dust covered every surface. Rusted tools hung from walls. Jars filled with unrecognizable substances lined a shelf. In the corner, a dark stain spread across the floorboards. Deep red and sticky. Sarah gagged. "We're leaving," she whispered, voice trembling. I agreed silently, feeling the unease crawl up my spine. Before we could retreat to the Jeep, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. The shadows shifted. Then soft whispers echoed around us, words in a language none of us recognized. We bolted outside, fumbling for the Jeep keys. The engine roared to life, tires spinning on gravel as Tom sped away. The fog thickened behind us, clinging to the Jeep like hands reaching from the trees. Figures flitted at the edges of our vision, always just out of reach. Jenna swore she saw one standing in the middle of the road, tall, impossibly thin, its head tilting unnaturally. I blinked, and it was gone. We drove for what felt like hours, disoriented. Every turn looked the same, every stretch of road a mirror of the last. Our phones were dead. The gas gauge ticked lower, and there were no stations in sight. Sarah began to cry quietly, muttering, "It's not real. It can't be real." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her doubt. Tom's bravado had faded, replaced by a grim focus on keeping the Jeep moving. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, certain that something followed us. At times, I could swear the fog itself was alive, shifting and crawling along the pavement. Around 3 a.m., we saw headlights approaching. Relief surged, but as they drew closer, the vehicle didn't look right. No shape, no form. Just a pale glow, moving unnaturally slow, almost floating. The Jeep jerked when Tom swerved to avoid it, tires screeching. The glow split into multiple smaller lights, darting between the trees like fireflies, surrounding us. The whispers returned, louder, urgent, almost angry now. I could feel the Jeep trembling beneath us. Then the lights vanished and the road was empty again. We finally reached a clearing as dawn broke. A small, rural town appeared in the distance, complete with a diner, a gas station, and a few houses. Relief washed over us. We parked and walked cautiously toward the diner. The streets were eerily empty. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and bacon, but no one served us. A radio played softly in the corner, static between songs. On the wall, old photographs depicted townsfolk, all of them staring straight at the camera with hollow eyes. I shivered. Something was off. We left quickly, trying to find a working gas station. The fog returned before we reached the highway, thick and suffocating. The Jeep ran out of gas miles from any town. We abandoned it and started walking, hoping to find help. The forest closed in, trees bending unnaturally, casting shadows that moved against the direction of the sun. The whispers followed, rising and falling like waves. Footsteps echoed behind us, though we could see no one. Each step forward felt like a mile, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on us. By nightfall, we stumbled upon another cabin. This one looked different, newer, as if freshly painted, but every window was blacked out. We didn't approach this time. The fog was too thick, the whispers too persistent. We camped in the trees, trying to stay low, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. All night, shadows moved around us, and every now and then we caught glimpses of figures standing just beyond the firelight, tall, thin, and featureless. Sarah refused to sleep. Tom and I took turns watching, clutching makeshift weapons, though we knew they were useless. Morning brought no relief. The landscape had changed overnight. Familiar trees were gone, replaced by twisted versions of themselves. The dirt trail we had followed yesterday led to a cliff we were certain hadn't been there before. We climbed down carefully, trying to stay calm. Hours passed, and every turn led us deeper into the forest, farther from any recognizable landmarks. Food and water were running low. Our voices grew hoarse from shouting and calling out for help. Nothing answered except the occasional whisper, barely audible, urging us onward, deeper, always deeper. By the third day, exhaustion and fear had taken over. Tom had stopped talking. Sarah wandered silently, occasionally stopping to stare into the trees as if listening. I kept a journal in my head, trying to mark our path, but the forest seemed to shift, erasing any trace of where we had been. The whispers turned into voices we recognized, our own names, distorted, calling us to leave, to turn around. I refused. I didn't want to look back. None of us did. But sometimes in the corner of my eye, I saw the shapes again. Tall, thin, watching, waiting. I realized that no matter how far we went, no matter which road we took, we were never leaving. On the fourth night, we came across another road. Unlike the dirt trails, this one was paved, familiar, with faint markings. Hope surged briefly. Maybe it led to a town, maybe back to civilization. We drove cautiously. As the night deepened, the fog returned, thickening around us, swirling in unnatural patterns. Shadows moved with a consciousness, darting across the road. Our headlights cut through it, but they revealed nothing solid, only movement. The whispers were louder now, insistent, angry. Sarah screamed when she thought she saw a figure in the road, tall and hunched, stepping out from the trees. The Jeep skidded. We were out of control. I grabbed the wheel, Tom clinging beside me. We managed to swerve, but the road behind us seemed endless, a loop with no escape. We tried stopping at towns, any signs of life, but every place was deserted, abandoned, or worse, seemed frozen in time. Buildings looked decades old, roads cracked and overgrown. Gas stations had pumps that didn't work, motels had no vacancy signs, even in the afternoon. Sometimes lights flickered in the distance, drawing us closer, only to vanish when we approached. The whispers followed, relentless, like the forest itself was alive and hunting us. Weeks passed, or was it days? I stopped keeping track. Hunger, fear, and fatigue blurred reality. We tried leaving the Jeep once, on foot, hoping to find a highway or help, but the forest swallowed us. Every step forward felt like being dragged backward. The shapes were always there, on the edges of vision, watching, never approaching directly, but never leaving. The whispers became voices, repeating warnings, curses, and my own name, distorted. Sleep became impossible, food became scarce, water contaminated. We were prisoners on a road that shifted and changed, a living nightmare that didn't end. Finally, one morning, or maybe it was night, I saw lights through the fog. Not a town, not a cabin, but headlights. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. The vehicle moved strangely, like it wasn't bound by the road, gliding over it. The shapes were back, darting between trees, surrounding us. The whispers formed into clear words. You never leave. You are ours. I realized then that we had never left. That cabin, the fog, the roads, the figures, they were all part of the same trap. We were stuck in a liminal space, a nightmare layered over reality, a place between worlds where roads led nowhere and time had no meaning. They found the Jeep eventually, abandoned at the edge of a forest road. No one ever found us. Travelers still tell stories of a Jeep with 4 young people disappearing somewhere between Indianapolis and the Smokies. Some say they see headlights moving in the fog, hear whispers on deserted roads, and feel eyes watching from the trees. Those who do rarely speak of it again, at least not without fear. And the road, it's always there, waiting, shifting, calling. Sometimes, if you drive too far through fog and shadow, you might see the cabin, hear the hum, and know, too late, that some roads are never meant to be traveled. Story the end. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, the kind of last-minute getaway my friends and I would do to break the monotony of our lives. I'd recently graduated from college in Ohio, and the 3 of us, me, Jenna, and Marcus, were all itching to escape the same old routines. Marcus had this idea to drive down through Kentucky into Tennessee, then maybe swing through North Carolina, figuring we'd see the Smoky Mountains before the summer ended. None of us were planning meticulously. That wasn't our style. We thrived on spontaneous plans, which, looking back, might have been our biggest mistake. We packed Jenna's hatchback with sleeping bags, snacks, and a cooler full of sodas and sandwiches. By mid-afternoon on a Friday, we were on I-71 heading south, the sun low but not yet setting, painting everything in that warm, golden glow that makes you feel untouchable. Music was blasting, windows were down, and there was laughter. Lots of laughter. Everything felt effortless, like we were in our own little bubble of freedom. As evening approached, we decided to leave the interstate for a more scenic route. Marcus had pulled out a crumpled map, claiming he knew a shortcut that would take us through some small towns, maybe even a hidden gem of a mountain road. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the windshield. At first, the road was charming. Narrow, lined with dense trees, a few dilapidated barns here and there, a town or two that seemed straight out of a 1950s postcard. But soon, the charm faded. By the time night fully descended, the road had turned into a single, winding ribbon of asphalt, flanked by thick forest. Streetlights were non-existent, and our headlights barely penetrated the darkness. We laughed nervously when a deer darted across the road, its eyes glowing like eerie green lanterns. I remember Jenna saying, "This is exactly why horror movies exist," and we all chuckled, but the laughter had a hollow edge to it. About 2 hours into this detour, our car began to sputter. Marcus swore the tank was full. I swore I had checked the oil that morning. The engine coughed and then died completely. We were stranded in near total darkness, save for our headlights, which barely illuminated the road ahead. We got out, flashlight beams cutting through the black. The forest seemed unnaturally silent. No rustling of leaves, no chirping of insects. Just this heavy, oppressive quiet. Great, Marcus muttered, popping the hood, though he clearly had no idea what he was doing. Just great. We argued briefly about what to do. Jenna suggested walking to the nearest town, which according to the map was supposedly 3 miles down the road. It didn't feel safe. There were no sidewalks, and the forest seemed to close in on us from both sides. But we didn't have many options. As we walked, the air grew colder, even though it was still early September. Mist started to roll across the road in low, creeping waves. It wasn't fog exactly. It had a strange, almost oily quality, clinging to our clothes and hair. I noticed a faint shape in the distance. At first, I thought it was a signpost, but as we drew closer, it became clear that it wasn't anything man-made. It was a figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. "Hello?" Jenna called, her voice wavering. The figure didn't move. I squinted, trying to make out any details. It looked human, but somehow wrong. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its limbs seemed too long. For a brief second, I could swear it was grinning at us. Then it was gone. We froze, exchanging panicked glances. "It's probably someone else stranded," Marcus said, though his voice was shaky. "Maybe it walked back into the woods." We pressed on, hurrying now, our flashlights bobbing with every step. The mist thickened, and the forest seemed to lean in, closing off the road behind us. I felt something brush past my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. After what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes, we saw the faint glow of lights ahead. Relief flooded through us. "Finally," Jenna whispered. "It's a house or a gas station or something." As we approached, we realized it was neither. It looked like a small motel, the kind you see in older horror movies with flickering neon that barely illuminated the parking lot. The sign read Whispering Pines Inn. The letters were half burned out, but the inn was still readable. We parked haphazardly and approached the office. No one answered our knocking. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lobby was musty, like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Yellowed wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the furniture was covered in plastic sheets. A bell sat on the counter, dusty and untouched. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone here?" The silence was thick, oppressive. Jenna's hand found mine instinctively. Then, from the back of the office, we heard it. A slow, deliberate shuffle. A man, or what looked like a man, emerged. His clothing was tattered and his face was obscured in shadow. His eyes glinted unnaturally in the dim light. He didn't speak, just stared, and the air seemed to grow heavier around him. Marcus cleared his throat. Hi, we need a room." He tilted his head, the motion jerky, like a puppet. "Rooms?" His voice was low, gravelly, almost inhuman. Then he pointed toward a narrow hallway that led to the rooms. "Rooms this way," he croaked. We followed, but the hall seemed impossibly long. Each door we passed looked identical, and the lighting flickered overhead. I had the unsettling feeling we were walking in circles, though I knew that was impossible. When we reached the first room, the man opened it and stepped aside. The room was small, but clean. Too clean. The bed was made perfectly, as though no one had ever slept there. On the nightstand was a small note written in neat, precise handwriting. "Do not leave after midnight. He is awake." We stared at it. Jenna swallowed hard. "He? Who?" The man in the hallway didn't answer. He just stood there, silent and motionless. Hesitation and fear warred with our need for safety. We decided to take the room anyway, locking the door behind us. Night fell, and with it came a series of noises that made sleep impossible. Thumping on the walls, whispers in a language I didn't recognize, and footsteps pacing outside our door. Each time we dared to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. Around midnight, the noises intensified. There was a loud knock, then a scraping sound, as if fingernails were dragging across the wood of the door. Jenna whimpered. Marcus whispered, "It's just the wind," but his own voice lacked conviction. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us, echoing off the walls. Then a voice, low and guttural, right outside the door. "Why are you here?" We didn't respond. We couldn't. Our hearts were pounding so loudly I thought it would betray us. The door handle rattled violently. Something was trying to get in. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to lose meaning. Finally, Just before dawn, the noises stopped, the lights flickered back on, the note on the nightstand was gone, the hallway outside was empty. When we finally left the room, the man in the hallway was gone. The office was deserted. No sign of anyone at the motel, not a single car, not a single soul. It was like the Whispering Pines Inn had never been inhabited at all. We stumbled back to our car, which had somehow started on its own. No explanation. We didn't speak much as we drove away, sticking to the main roads this time. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the fields and forests, but nothing could shake the unease clinging to us. When we finally reached a gas station in a small town, we tried to tell the attendant about what happened. He looked at us like we were insane. "Whispering Pines?" he said slowly. "That place burned down 15 years ago. No one's been inside since. They said the fire was suspicious, like the building didn't want anyone there." We drove in stunned silence. The reality of it didn't fully hit until hours later, when we tried to retrace the route on our map. There was no road where we remembered the motel being. The forested stretch we had driven through didn't exist on any map. We never spoke about it again, at least not aloud. But every time I hear the term road trip, I remember that stretch of road, the unnatural mist, the figure in the trees, and the Whispering Pines Inn. And every time I feel that same chill, the same oppressive sense that something was awake, watching, waiting. Even now, years later, driving through a forested road at night, I find myself gripping the wheel tighter, scanning the tree line for any movement, listening for whispers that might not be there, but could be. Because once you've seen what we saw, you know the world isn't always what it seems. Some roads lead to nowhere, and some places, they never want visitors to leave. The memory haunts me. The way the air thickened, the figure in the woods, the hallway that went on forever. I can't explain it, and maybe that's the scariest part, that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that prey on our curiosity, things that exist in the shadows just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to remind us we are never truly alone. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can see the hallway stretching infinitely, the man in the shadows tilting his head, and I hear that low, guttural voice whispering just outside my door. "Why are you here?" I've tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was a dream, a trick of our tired minds. But deep down, I know better. There are roads you don't take, places you don't enter, because some horrors aren't meant to be seen, and some questions are better left unanswered. The memory is a scar I carry, a warning I wish I could share with the world. When you're traveling and a place feels wrong, trust that feeling, because some destinations aren't on any map, and some travelers never truly return from where they go. We didn't. Not entirely. Story the end. The wind had been picking up all day as I drove down Highway 42, a 2-lane stretch of asphalt that cut through the dense forests of northern Wisconsin. I had left Chicago early that morning, convinced that the weekend trip to Lake Superior would be the perfect escape from the suffocating rhythm of my city life. The GPS had me on a back road now, the kind of route that locals might use to avoid traffic, but that tourists like me rarely took. The sun had dipped behind the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows over the road, and I realized I had no cell service for the past hour. A sense of unease began to creep over me, but I brushed it off. "It's just the woods," I muttered aloud, more to calm myself than anything. By the time I saw the small gas station tucked into a clearing, I was relieved. The place looked abandoned at first glance, the paint peeling from the walls, the pumps rusted and stained with oil, but lights flickered weakly inside. I parked and got out, the cold air biting through my hoodie. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. A thin man with a face like folded cardboard looked up from behind the counter. He was older, probably in his 70s, wearing a flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans. His eyes, pale and dull, followed me as I wandered toward the shelves. "Evenin'," he said, voice raspy. "Where you headed?" "Lake Superior," I said, trying to sound casual, "just passing through." He nodded slowly. "You sure about that road you're on? Not much out there after dark." I smiled, half in embarrassment, half in defiance. "I've got this." He didn't argue, but I could feel his gaze linger on me as I paid for gas and a snack. I pushed the door open, and the wind slammed it against the frame with a thud. As I drove off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The kind of sensation that creeps across your skin and makes the hairs on your neck stand on end. The road narrowed, the trees growing closer together, branches scraping against the car like fingernails. The GPS blinked its no signal warning. That's when I saw the figure. Standing on the edge of the road, it was impossibly tall, dressed in dark clothing that blended seamlessly with the shadows. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. When I leaned out of the window, it was gone, not a trace in the ditch or the trees. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the dim headlights against the fog forming over the road. But then it happened again, only this time on the left side, closer to the car. I swerved slightly to avoid it, catching only a glimpse. Pale face, hollow eyes, a faint smile that didn't reach them. The kind of smile that feels wrong. My hands tightened on the wheel as I pressed the accelerator, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever that was. The sky grew darker, clouds heavy and low. Rain started to fall in thick sheets, turning the road into a reflective ribbon. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and I slowed, the tires hissing over the wet asphalt. That's when I noticed the truck. It appeared suddenly in my rearview mirror, headlights blinding. Big rig, no license plate, its engine roaring. I tried to move over to let it pass, but no matter what I did, it stayed glued to my tail, its horn honking intermittently. I felt panic rising like bile in my throat. I pressed the accelerator again, weaving slightly, but the truck mirrored every move I made. I remembered the old rest stop I had passed miles back. Maybe I could wait it out there. I turned off onto a narrow gravel road that led to a small clearing with a decaying wooden shelter. The truck followed, every ounce of instinct screaming at me to run. I parked, cut the engine, and ducked down, hoping the rain and darkness would hide me. Minutes passed, no truck. I peeked out, the rain now hammering on the roof of my car. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. The forest seemed alive now, the wind whispering through the trees with voices I couldn't place. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and I felt eyes on me. I grabbed my phone only to find it dead, not out of battery, completely unresponsive. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not from the road, but from the tree line, moving slowly, methodically toward the clearing. My heart nearly stopped. I tried the door, but it had been locked automatically when I closed it. Locked from the outside, I didn't think that was possible. The footsteps stopped just beyond the shelter, and I could hear breathing. Deep, wet, ragged. I backed into the far corner of the car, silent, hoping whatever it was would go away. The sound lingered for minutes. I dared a glance through the windshield. The figure, the same tall, pale figure, standing there unmoving, its eyes locked on mine. Then it raised a hand, pointing at me. I panicked. I didn't think. I just grabbed the keys and slammed the door open. The rain soaked me instantly as I ran toward the road. I jumped into the car and turned the key, and the engine roared to life. I floored it, tires spinning on wet gravel, and prayed the truck wasn't waiting on the other side. It wasn't, for now. I made it back to Highway 42, hugging the center line, eyes darting into the darkness. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted. The forest seemed endless, twisting into unfamiliar paths even though I knew I hadn't taken any turns. The GPS flickered weakly, then died again. That's when I noticed something else. The signs. Every road sign I passed was the same, not just similar, identical. County Road 42, mile markers repeating numbers I had already passed. Panic bubbled over. I had to be going in circles. Then I saw it again. The truck, impossibly close now, headlights cutting through the fog like twin knives. I tried to signal it to pass, to move, anything. It didn't. The horn blared. I realized I couldn't escape it. My hands trembled on the wheel. My foot pressed harder on the gas, the engine screaming in protest. I couldn't see the road ahead clearly, only the bright, oppressive lights behind me. Something flickered in my peripheral vision. Another figure? A pair of eyes glowing faintly in the darkness? I jerked the wheel, trying to avoid a tree that hadn't been there before. The car skidded, fishtailing across the wet asphalt. I slammed into the ditch. The engine stalled. I was trapped. I sat there, chest heaving, listening. The footsteps came again, closer this time, circling the car. The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof like a warning. I could see them now, two figures, tall, pale, unnaturally still, standing in the waterlogged ditch around me. They moved closer, synchronized, like shadows given life. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. One tapped on the window, slow, deliberate. My reflection in the glass, pale, wet, terror-stricken, stared back at me. The second figure leaned closer, and I could see it smiling, impossibly wide, eyes black voids. And then I saw it. My own reflection, mimicking the movements of the figure, smiling back at me in a way I could not control. I don't remember how long I sat there, paralyzed. Time seemed meaningless. When I finally found the courage to start the engine again, the figures were gone. The truck was gone. Even the forest seemed to have retreated. I drove, not daring to look back until the first signs of civilization appeared. A diner, its neon lights buzzing weakly. I pulled in, drenched, shaking, gasping. Inside, the waitress looked at me like I had grown horns overnight. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice sounded like it came from a different world. I think so," I said, though I wasn't sure I was. I tried calling the police, explaining my situation, but when I told them where I had been, their expressions shifted. "There's no County Road 42 out there," the dispatcher said slowly. "You're in the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. That road doesn't exist." I wanted to argue, to insist, but the memory of the figures, the truck, the endless forest stopped me. I drove away from the diner, back toward the interstate, toward anything that resembled the normal world. Weeks later, I tried to tell people about it. Friends, family, even a travel forum. The responses ranged from polite concern to outright laughter. Some suggested stress, lack of sleep, or even hallucinations brought on by isolation. I couldn't argue. I had no evidence. My GPS had recorded nothing. My car had no damage. And yet I knew what I had seen, knew what had followed me, knew the feeling of those eyes on me, the cold air that seemed to seep into my bones. I tried to forget, but it lingered. Dreams became worse than the memory. I would wake in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking I saw headlights in the distance, thinking I heard footsteps circling the bed. Every forest, every dark road, every empty gas station brought back that same suffocating terror. Then, last month, I got a postcard. No return address. Just a single sentence in shaky handwriting. "See you on County Road 42. I never drive that way anymore. I avoid all back roads. I avoid forests entirely if I can help it. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see the roads stretching endlessly into the darkness, the rain falling in sheets, the truck's headlights chasing me, and those figures always just beyond the trees, always smiling, always waiting. I've tried to rationalize it, to call it a nightmare, a trick of my mind, but I know better. Some roads are not meant to be traveled. Some journeys have a price you can't see until it's too late, and some places never let you leave. I can hear them even now in the quiet of my apartment. The faint hum of an engine, a whisper of wind through imaginary trees, footsteps circling me when I'm alone. I try to ignore it, but deep down, I know it's coming back. I know it never truly went away. And one day, whether I like it or not, I'll be back on that road, speeding through the rain, chased by something I can't fight, something that waits patiently for me in the endless dark. Story, the end. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, one of those spontaneous ideas that make you feel alive. I had been cooped up in Chicago for months, working long hours at a software startup, and my friend Jason called me on a Friday afternoon, the kind of call that comes with too much energy and not enough sense. "Let's hit the road. No plan. Just drive. Trust me," he said. I agreed, mostly because I wanted out, and the idea of any kind of adventure felt better than the fluorescent lit cubicle I had been staring at all week. We left that evening around 6 p.m. in his beat-up Chevy Impala. The sky was bruised with the early hints of night, and the highways were just thick enough with traffic to make the city feel alive without being suffocating. Jason drove first. I sat in the passenger seat with my backpack at my feet, staring out at the blur of lights that trailed behind us. We didn't have a destination, but Jason suggested we head west, maybe camp somewhere in Iowa or Nebraska. I didn't care. I just wanted the road, the empty stretch of asphalt that promised freedom, however temporary. Around 9 p.m., we decided to stop at a rest area near the Illinois-Iowa border. The place was deserted, save for a few trucks idling under the yellow glare of flickering lamps. Jason wanted to grab coffee from the vending machine. As he stepped out, I noticed a man sitting on a bench a little way off. He was hunched, wearing a dark hooded jacket, and his face was partially hidden in the shadows. There was nothing immediately threatening about him, but something felt off. The kind of off that doesn't make sense until it's too late. Jason didn't notice. He chatted with the man for a few seconds before coming back, laughing about some joke I couldn't hear. I brushed it off, told myself I was just being paranoid. Back on the road, we were quiet for a while, the hum of the tires on asphalt almost meditative. But somewhere past midnight, near the outskirts of Iowa, the GPS signal started to fail. Jason cursed under his breath, tapping the screen. Typical. We're in the middle of nowhere, he muttered. I remember thinking how oddly silent it was outside the car. No wind, no animals, not even the occasional rumble of distant trucks. Just the dark, endless fields stretching to the horizon. I tried to focus on the road, but then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the highway, motionless, almost blending into the tall grass. I blinked, and it was gone. Did you see that? I asked, trying to sound casual. Jason didn't respond immediately. Then he laughed nervously. See what? You're tired, man. It's probably a scarecrow or something. But I knew it wasn't a scarecrow. The way it had stood, the way it had watched. We kept driving, the silence stretching longer, thicker. About an hour later, the car began to stutter. First, a slight jerk, then a series of bumps that made us slam our hands on the dashboard. Jason swore, trying to restart the engine, but it just died completely. We were stranded on a pitch-black stretch of road, the headlights illuminating nothing but the fields on either side. Jason got out to check under the hood while I stayed inside, gripping the steering wheel like it could protect me. I glanced around and saw movement in the darkness. Not far, maybe 50 feet off the road, shadows shifting, but I couldn't make out a shape. My heart started to pound. Then I heard it. A low, dragging sound, like someone or something moving through the grass. Jason, I yelled. He didn't respond. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out, scanning the area. The air was thick, cold, and smelled faintly of rot. I called his name again, my voice trembling, and that's when I saw it. The figure from the highway, now closer. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, almost like it wasn't fully in control of its own body. And then I noticed its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. Jason stumbled out from behind the car, face pale. "We need to go. Now," he whispered. I ran back to the car, slamming the doors shut. We tried the engine again. Nothing. That's when the figure emerged onto the road, slow but deliberate. Not running, not walking. It just moved. Toward us. "Call 911, I said, fumbling for my phone. No signal. Not even a hint. We were trapped. The figure kept advancing, and then I saw more of them, maybe 3, maybe 4, emerging from the fields on either side. Silent, relentless, their glowing eyes fixated on us. Jason and I got back in the car and locked the doors. He was shaking, muttering something about hitchhikers, about some urban legend his cousin had told him. I didn't care about legends. I only knew that if those things reached the car, we were dead. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they stopped. Or maybe we just couldn't see them anymore. The headlights seemed to push the darkness back, but every instinct in my body screamed that we were still being watched. Hours passed. We didn't move. The sky began to lighten slightly, hinting at dawn, and we were too terrified to try the engine again. That's when we saw another car, distant headlights coming down the road. Relief washed over us. "Signal him! Signal him!" Jason shouted, waving his arms. The car slowed as it approached, then passed by without even glancing at us. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw them. Another figure standing in the middle of the road, watching us, smiling. The engine roared to life on its own, or maybe it had just been the fear messing with our perception. We didn't stop to find out. We drove until we reached a small town, a place with gas stations, diners, and real people. But the sense of dread didn't leave. Every shadow felt like it was watching, every passerby's glance too intentional. We spent the day there, trying to convince ourselves it had been a hallucination, some shared sleep deprivation nightmare. But the memory of those glowing eyes, the jerky movement, the silence, it stayed with us. And when we finally drove home, back into the familiar lights and sounds of Chicago, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those figures on the road behind us. I avoided highways for months after that. Even on well-lit interstates, I found myself gripping the wheel, imagining shadows emerging from the fields. Jason swore he saw them too once, late at night, standing at the edge of a parking lot in Wisconsin. We never spoke of it in detail. because even talking about it seemed to make it more real, like the attention we gave it could call it back. Months later, I found a forum post, someone describing the same stretch of highway, the same glowing-eyed figures, the same engine stutter. Others dismissed it as urban legend, some kind of viral story. But a few posts matched our experience so closely it was chilling. People had disappeared there, never to be found. Some mentioned hearing low, dragging noises at night, seeing shadows move just beyond the lights. I never drove that route again. Jason moved out of state, and we stopped talking for a while, the memory too heavy to unpack in casual conversation. But I still dream about it sometimes. The fields stretching endlessly, the dark shapes moving, their eyes glowing with something inhuman, something patient and ancient. It makes you question reality when you're there. The human mind wants to rationalize, to find patterns, to name the unknown. But out there, in that stretch of highway under the Iowa stars, there was no logic. Just the road, the dark, and something waiting. I learned that sometimes the stories you hear as warnings are true. Sometimes what seems like paranoia is survival instinct, and sometimes what you see in the darkness is not meant to be understood, only survived. Even now, years later, I drive carefully on rural highways. I stick to the light, to the towns, to the known. But I know that stretch still exists, untouched and waiting for anyone foolish or desperate enough to wander there at night. I know it watches, and I know it remembers. The night will always come, and somewhere out there on a road that seems empty, it's still moving through the grass, patient, silent, waiting for the next travelers who think they're alone. And when you see it, you realize that sometimes freedom isn't the road stretching ahead, but the darkness you hope never finds you. Story. The end. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of black asphalt swallowed by the thick darkness of the Appalachian Mountains. I had been driving for hours, my headlights cutting feebly through the mist that clung to the trees like a living shroud. My name is Mark, and I wasn't exactly a stranger to long solo trips. I had done cross-country drives before, but this one felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that seemed to press against my chest, an unexplainable dread that whispered just beyond the edge of my consciousness. I had set out from Asheville in the late afternoon, wanting to reach a small town called Buckridge before nightfall. The map promised a scenic route, a shortcut through winding mountain roads that I had never traveled before. Somewhere along the way, the sun had dipped behind the peaks, and the golden evening glow had been replaced by a gray, suffocating twilight. The trees on either side of the road leaned toward each other, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead, forming dark tunnels that seemed almost alive. I noticed it first when the radio began acting up. At first, it was just static, a crackling that I assumed was poor reception. But then, faintly, a voice emerged from the white noise. A whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it. I turned the dial, trying to catch a proper station, but every channel carried the same distorted but half-formed sentences. The voice didn't speak any language I recognized. It was more like a cadence, a rhythm of syllables that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was the static playing tricks, but the unease settled deeper in my gut. The road started to narrow. The painted lines faded and cracked. My headlights picked out a small sign, Buckridge, 12 miles. I hadn't expected the town to be so far off the main highway, and something about the distance in the dark made me uneasy. I felt a strange compulsion to turn back, to abandon the shortcut, but a stubborn part of me resisted. A few miles down, I noticed movement at the edge of the forest. I swerved slightly, thinking it was a deer, but the shape was too tall, too thin. Its eyes glowed briefly in the headlights, then vanished. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of light and shadow, but the feeling didn't leave me. There was something watching me, and the thought gnawed at my mind with a slow, insidious hunger. As I rounded a particularly sharp curve, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. The figure didn't move. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, tall and gaunt, wearing tattered clothes. His face was pale, almost luminescent in the beams of my car, but his eyes were hollow, like dark pits that drew the light into themselves. I tried to swerve around him, but my car skidded on the wet road, fishtailing dangerously. The figure stepped aside at the last moment, but not before I caught a glimpse of something horrifying, a grin that stretched unnaturally wide, splitting his face in a grotesque parody of a smile. I pressed the accelerator and flew past him, heart hammering, hands shaking, praying the road would remain straight. The forest grew thicker as I drove, and the darkness became almost tangible. The mist clung to the windshield, and my wipers barely cut through it. I thought I saw movement in the fog, shapes darting just beyond the glow of my headlights, but every time I blinked, they vanished. I tried to focus on the road, to reason with myself, but my rational mind was slipping. Then, the car's engine sputtered. I glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge wasn't empty. The RPMs were fine. I switched off the radio, hoping the silence would help, but that's when I noticed the faint sound of footsteps behind the car. At first, it was just a soft crunch like someone walking on gravel. Then it grew louder, faster, synchronized with my racing heartbeat. I swerved again, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The road forked. One path led into a dark tunnel of trees, the other veered toward a dimly lit stretch with a broken sign. "Welcome to Buckridge. Population unknown." I had no choice. The left path looked like it would take me deeper into the mountains forever, and a cold logic told me to take the right. The town was nothing like I expected. The streetlights flickered, casting weak, jaundiced circles on the cracked pavement. Buildings leaned at strange angles, some abandoned, others with windows that reflected nothing. No light, no movement. The air smelled faintly of decay, like damp wood and rotting leaves. A few cars sat in driveways, their doors ajar, engines cold, but there was no sign of life. I parked in front of what looked like a diner, the neon sign buzzing weakly, "The Last Stop." I stepped out hoping to find someone, anyone, but the silence was absolute. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. The diner's door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a room frozen in time. Tables set, menus still upright, a coffee pot on the burner, with steam curling lazily into the air as if the place had just been abandoned seconds ago. I called out. My voice sounded thin and hollow in the emptiness. No reply. Then I noticed the walls. Pictures hung crookedly, depicting families I didn't recognize. Faces blurred, features smudged like watercolors left in the rain. One photograph caught my eye. A man standing by the same diner, same pose, same hollow eyes I had seen on the road. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer. The eyes seemed to follow me, dark and accusing. A sudden noise made me spin around. The door slammed shut behind me, though I hadn't touched it. The air grew colder, a creeping chill that wrapped around my spine. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose in my throat. I ran to the windows. They were opaque with grime, the faint light outside dim and distorted. The town beyond seemed wrong, almost unreal. Footsteps again. Not outside this time. They echoed inside the diner, soft at first, then growing louder, circling me. I could hear whispers, overlapping voices, repeating the same garbled syllables I had heard on the radio. My hands shook violently as I tried to find an exit. Then the shadows shifted. Shapes emerged, tall and thin, moving with impossible grace. They didn't run. They glided, twisting unnaturally as they approached. I bolted to the back door, forcing it open. It led into a narrow alleyway, dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp. The fog had thickened, curling around the buildings like living smoke. I ran blindly, heart hammering, lungs burning. Behind me, I heard the scraping of nails against concrete, the soft, wet thud of something keeping pace with me. The streets twisted and turned, never leading anywhere familiar. Every corner I turned, the town repeated itself. Same buildings, same flickering lights, same silence. I began to realize that Buckridge wasn't a place on a map. It was a trap, a maze designed to ensnare, to confuse, to break the mind. I found myself in front of a small church. Its doors were open, inviting in a way that was almost mocking. I ran inside, hoping for sanctuary, only to find the interior empty, but for pews that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air was thick, choking. The whispers had become voices now, murmuring directly in my mind, speaking words I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. I stumbled forward, tripping over the threshold, and fell to my knees. That's when I saw it. A figure at the altar, shrouded in darkness, taller than any man should be, limbs impossibly long, head tilted at a cruel angle. It didn't move, yet I felt its gaze pierce through me. My mind screamed to run, but my body was frozen, anchored by fear. A sudden sound, a child's laugh, echoed through the church. I turned, but there was no one there. The laughter grew, multiplied, surrounding me. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, half-seen figures darting between the pews. One of them came close enough that I felt its cold breath, smelled decay and rust. I forced myself to my feet, running blindly toward the nearest door. It opened into a street I didn't recognize, lined with houses that looked normal, almost comforting. I ran, searching for any sign of life, and finally spotted headlights in the distance. A car moving slowly as if searching. I waved frantically, screaming. The car stopped, and a man stepped out. Relief washed over me until I saw his face. Hollow eyes, wide grin, and the same tattered clothes. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, desperation giving me speed I didn't know I had. The buildings behind me seemed to stretch and twist, the streets elongating. The fog thickened until I could barely see my own hands. I tripped, falling hard onto the pavement. When I looked up, the town was gone. There was nothing but trees, endless darkness, and the road ahead, winding and lonely. I ran until dawn, eventually finding a highway that led me back to civilization. The world felt normal again, the sun cutting through the mist, birds singing. I tried to tell people about Buckridge, about the things I saw, but no one had heard of it. Maps showed nothing. GPS didn't recognize the coordinates, and every time I think about that road, that diner, the hollow eyes, I feel a chill that refuses to leave. I know one thing for certain. Buckridge is real, even if the world refuses to acknowledge it. And somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, that town waits, swallowing travelers who stray too far from the known paths, twisting reality until it consumes them entirely. I'll never drive that way again, but sometimes, at night, I think I hear the whispers on the wind, the faint echo of footsteps behind me, always just out of sight, and I know that one day, if I'm not careful, Buckridge will find me again. Story, the end. It started on a late September evening, the kind where the air hangs heavy with a quiet, almost eerie stillness, like the world itself is holding its breath. I had been planning a solo road trip for months, craving the kind of freedom that comes with long stretches of asphalt and the hum of tires over blacktop. My car was packed with the essentials: a small cooler, a worn backpack, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and a road map. Old-fashioned paper, because sometimes I like to trust something that can't die when the battery runs out. I left Chicago in the early afternoon, hoping to reach a small town in rural Missouri by nightfall, somewhere I could pull over and sleep in peace. The first few hours were uneventful, just the kind of monotony I love on road trips. Radio stations drifted in and out of reception, sometimes only static, sometimes faint country music. The highway was mostly empty, the sun dipping behind the horizon, painting everything in gold and orange hues. It wasn't until I veered onto a smaller, less traveled route that I began to notice a strange quiet. Even the occasional trucks that had passed on the main highway seemed to vanish, leaving me in a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside the car. About 2 hours into this stretch, I passed a sign indicating the name of a town, Mill Hollow. It looked small, probably just a cluster of houses and a gas station, but something about it felt off. There were no cars on the streets, no lights, nothing to indicate anyone was awake or alive. I thought about stopping, maybe to ask for directions or gas, but I wasn't sure if I trusted that eerie stillness. Instead, I kept driving, figuring I could push a little further before nightfall. The road narrowed, twisting sharply in places, with trees looming over the asphalt like guardians, or predators. Shadows stretched across the pavement, and the wind picked up, rattling my windows. I flicked on the headlights, but it seemed like they did little more than illuminate the fog rolling in from the sides of the road. That's when I noticed the first of them. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the shoulder. I couldn't tell much in the dim light, but it looked like a person, pale, unmoving. My pulse quickened. As I approached, the figure didn't move, didn't blink. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was probably a deer or some roadside object distorted by the fog. By the time I glanced in the rearview mirror to see if it had moved, it was gone. Shaking off the unease, I drove on. The road wound deeper into the woods, and soon I realized I hadn't seen a single sign of civilization for miles. My phone had no signal, of course, which wasn't unusual in rural areas, but the emptiness started to feel oppressive. Then came the sound. a low, dragging noise coming from the woods on either side. It was subtle at first, almost drowned out by the engine, but it became more distinct the longer I drove. Something was moving parallel to the road, staying just out of view in the shadows. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind rustling the leaves, maybe a fallen branch being carried along a creek. But the sound followed me, a slow, deliberate scraping, as if something were matching my speed. I pressed the accelerator, the headlights cutting through the fog, but every bend in the road seemed to reveal more shadows just at the edge of vision. That's when I saw it. A figure, taller than a human should be, standing in the middle of the road ahead. Its skin, or what I could see of it, was unnaturally pale, almost glowing in the headlights, and it didn't move as I approached. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt a few feet away, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The figure remained still, staring, though I couldn't see eyes, just a blankness where a face should have been. I didn't know how long I sat there, frozen, but eventually instinct kicked in. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, trying to get back the way I came. That's when I noticed them. Dozens of figures emerging from the trees surrounding the car from every side. Pale humanoid shapes, silent, motionless except for the slow, deliberate sway of their arms. My mind screamed at me to move, to drive past them, but it felt like the road itself had narrowed, funneling me into their midst. I floored the gas pedal, the car jolting forward. By some miracle, the figures receded as quickly as they had appeared, melting into the fog, leaving the road eerily empty again. Shaking, I kept driving, eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. My heart wouldn't slow down. The windscreen fogged up, though it wasn't cold enough for condensation, and I could swear I saw handprints forming and smearing on the glass, only to vanish the moment I wiped them away. My thoughts raced, trying to rationalize everything. Exhaustion, paranoia, the isolation of being alone on a dark road. But deep down, I knew none of this was normal. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell. The fog never lifted, the trees never thinned. Then, just as I began to think I might be losing my mind, I saw the faint glow of lights ahead. Relief surged through me. Civilization, finally. I drove toward it, eager to find a gas station, a diner, anything. The lights grew brighter, flickering like candles in the distance, and as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't a town. It was a motel. A small, isolated place, the kind that seems like a snapshot from the 1950s, neon flickering weakly, the paint peeling from its wooden exterior. A vacancy sign buzzed weakly. I pulled into the lot and parked, my hands still trembling. The building was empty. No cars, no people, nothing but the hum of the neon and the faint smell of damp wood. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out, flashlight in hand, expecting to see a clerk at the reception. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting for me. The lobby was dark, dusty, abandoned. The keys were gone from the counter, a bell on the desk unmoved for years. I felt my stomach twist, but exhaustion and fear propelled me onward. I had no other option. I needed shelter from the night, from the road, from whatever those things in the woods were. The rooms were exactly what I feared. Small, cold, and stale. I set my backpack down and leaned against the wall, trying to convince myself to relax, to sleep. I kept the flashlight on, illuminating every corner. That's when I noticed it, a mirror, old and tarnished, reflecting the room, but also something else. At first, I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the dim light. But the reflection in the mirror didn't match the room entirely. Shadows moved independently, figures standing behind me in the reflection that weren't in the room itself. My stomach turned and I spun around, but there was nothing. I turned back to the mirror and one of the figures was closer now, a pale silhouette with an indistinct face, reaching out with elongated fingers. Panic set in. I bolted from the room, heart hammering, back into the lobby. The door I had entered through was gone. In its place was a wall, the same peeling paint, the same smell of damp and decay. I ran down a hallway, doors on either side, all locked. I tried a window, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the floor above. I froze, pressed my back against the wall. The footsteps grew louder, descending toward me. I could hear breathing too, heavy and wet, though no one was visible. My mind screamed to run, to hide, but where could I go? The building seemed to stretch impossibly. Hallways looping in ways that made no sense, doors leading to the same rooms no matter which way I turned. Hours, maybe, passed like this. I ran, hid, and watched the shadows stretch and warp around me. Every door I opened revealed the same endless corridors, the same tarnished mirrors reflecting figures that didn't exist in reality. I tried to call for help on my phone, but the signal never returned. The motel had consumed everything: time, space, reason. I realized then that I was no longer in any place I could understand. The building wasn't just abandoned, it was alive in some sense, and it was watching me, corralling me like prey. Eventually, I collapsed in one of the rooms, exhausted beyond human endurance. The shadows gathered, forming shapes in the corners, in the mirrors, on the ceiling, pressing in on every side. They whispered, voices like the rustling of dead leaves, chanting words I couldn't comprehend. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused. And then I saw it, standing at the far end of the room, taller than the rest, darker, more defined. Its face was still featureless, but its presence radiated intent, focus. It stepped forward, and I felt my mind flicker, like static in a broken television. I don't know how long I stayed there, awake in terror before the dawn broke, or what I perceived as dawn. The motel doors were suddenly open, revealing the morning sun spilling onto the parking lot. Exhausted, I ran to my car, which was exactly where I had left it. Engine started, I drove out of the lot without looking back. The road opened up, familiar highway signs marking towns I actually knew. I drove through Mill Hollow again, but now the town looked like a normal, albeit tiny, Midwestern town, lights and windows, a few cars parked outside. No one stood by the trees, no scraping sounds, nothing unnatural. I never stopped driving until I reached St. Louis, where I pulled into a motel that actually had a clerk and a warm bed. Sleep came fitfully, with nightmares of faceless figures and endless corridors. The next morning I left, never venturing onto a back road again at night. The memories never left me, though. Sometimes when I'm driving late, I see shadows at the edges of the road, figures that don't move, don't breathe, just stand and watch. And I remember Mill Hollow, the dragging sound in the fog, the motel that wasn't supposed to exist. Every time I think I've escaped it, I realize that some part of it is still with me, lingering in the back of my mind, waiting for the next stretch of empty highway. Story the end. The plan was simple: a road trip from Minneapolis to New Orleans. My friends and I, Jake, Lauren, and me, had been talking about it for months. A few days to escape the stress of work and school, drive down south, see the country, eat the food, maybe hit a few local bars. We rented a mid-sized SUV, packed it full of snacks, camping gear, and an overabundance of playlists. No real itinerary except the promise of seeing things we hadn't seen before. It was supposed to be fun. We left early Saturday morning. The city was quiet, still asleep, and our car hummed down I-35 as the sun rose. Traffic was light, spirits high. Jake drove first, blaring old rock music, and Lauren and I argued over the route. She wanted to take the interstate all the way, safe and boring. I convinced her to let me try a detour I found online, some scenic back roads through Iowa and Missouri. Fewer cars, more views. She rolled her eyes but let me have it. At first, the detour was perfect. Endless fields, winding rivers, small towns with nothing but a gas station and a diner. We stopped for breakfast in one of those towns, a place called Springville. The diner smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fried eggs. A few locals sat at the counter, staring at us like they hadn't seen outsiders in years. They didn't say much. We didn't push. There was something in the way they looked at us, but we laughed it off. Maybe it was the way their eyes lingered too long, or the silence between their words. After breakfast, we drove into Missouri. The GPS started acting funny. The blue dot would jump ahead, then lag behind. It suggested roads that didn't exist, or roads that seemed to disappear into the trees. Jake muttered something about old maps or outdated data. "It's fine," I said, trying to convince myself. "We're on a back road. That's the whole point." By late afternoon, the scenery changed. The farmland gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The sun was dipping, and the roads narrowed, twisting between trees that pressed in from both sides. We passed an abandoned farmhouse with peeling paint and broken windows. Something about it made me shiver. Lauren glanced out the window and whispered, "I don't like this. It feels wrong." Jake laughed nervously. "Relax, it's just old. Nobody's here." But I didn't feel relaxed. We drove on. the road curving so sharply we had to slow down. Then we noticed the first thing that truly made us uneasy: tire tracks in the dirt that ran parallel to the road, fresh looking but no vehicle in sight. They were too narrow for a car, too deep for a bike, like someone had been walking, dragging something heavy. We passed without comment, but the feeling lingered, prickling along my spine. By the time we reached the Ozark foothills, the sun was gone. The forest swallowed the road, darkness pressing in from all sides. The GPS refused to update, insisting we turn left into a path that was clearly just a field. I ignored it, but every mile felt longer, the car moving slower, the shadows deeper. Then we heard it, a sound, faint at first, like whispering. Not voices, exactly, more like the wind, but intentional. Something moving along the trees, following. Jake swore it was just the wind. Lauren shivered silently, gripping her seatbelt. I turned on the radio, static blasting, trying to drown it out. The static pulsed in time with a faint tapping on the roof of the car. Slow, deliberate, not the kind of sound a tree branch would make. I shook it off, saying it was nothing, but the dogs in the backseat growled softly. Max and Ruby, our little terriers, refused to lie down. Their ears were pinned back, eyes darting into the darkness. We finally found a small, empty campsite around midnight. No lights, no other cars, just a dirt clearing surrounded by trees. We set up the tent, tried to start a small fire, but every movement felt wrong. The forest seemed too quiet, no insects, no distant owls, no rustling of leaves, just us and the oppressive weight of the night. At 2 a.m., the tapping returned, louder this time on the tent walls. Not like someone trying to be polite. Hard, sharp, rhythmic. Max and Ruby barked like they were trying to warn us. Jake and Lauren stared at each other, and I realized we were all frozen with fear. Then came the whispering. Close now, circling, always just at the edge of understanding. I wanted to scream, but my throat went dry. The fire flickered and died. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, bending against the trees, stretching impossibly long. We huddled in the car, hearts pounding. The whispering continued, and the tapping evolved into pounding. Something was trying to get in. I kept my eyes on the dark, saw shapes moving, figures crouched behind trees, too thin, too pale, staring at us with eyes that caught the faint moonlight. We didn't sleep. By dawn, we packed everything back into the car, trying to convince ourselves it was our imagination, exhaustion, or pranksters. But the footprints outside the tent told another story. Elongated human-like prints, bare, leading into the forest, then disappearing. No way any person could have come in the middle of the night without us noticing. The next day, we tried to stick to main roads. The route back to the interstate should have been simple, but every turn felt wrong. We drove past familiar landmarks twice, roads that looped in ways that defied logic. Shadows moved at the edge of our vision. Every time we slowed, the whispering returned. I felt eyes following, always watching, just out of reach. At a rest stop in southern Missouri, we saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure standing at the edge of the woods, pale, thin, still. No features, just a shape. And it was looking at us. When we blinked, it was gone, but every time we turned, it appeared farther down the road. Watching, waiting. By the time we reached Arkansas, we were in a haze of exhaustion. Jake was silent, gripping the wheel as if letting go would mean instant death. Lauren refused to look out the window. The dogs growled without reason. We stopped for gas in a small town. The clerk stared at us like we were strangers from another world. Something about the town felt wrong. Old, decaying, empty streets that should have been bustling. We ate, filled up the tank, and left quickly. Night fell as we crossed into Louisiana. The interstate should have been a relief, familiar and safe, but the whispering followed us, now audible, insistent. Our GPS again tried to lead us down a road that vanished into the bayou. I refused. We drove straight, praying for the lights of New Orleans. The figure appeared again that night, standing by a bridge over a dark swamp. Watching. Silent. And we felt it knew us now, had marked us in some way we didn't understand. We finally reached the city around 3 a.m., neon lights and traffic breaking the oppressive weight of the forest. Relief washed over us, but the fear lingered. Max and Ruby didn't settle, constantly growling at shadows that didn't exist. We booked a hotel near the French Quarter, triple-locked the door, and stayed up all night. We didn't sleep. For the next few days, the trip was surreal. We tried to enjoy the city, but the sense of being followed never left. The whispers, the shadows, the figure in the distance, it all felt like it had traveled with us. Every alley seemed longer than it should be, every corner hiding something just out of sight. I kept expecting it to appear at the hotel, to tap on the window, to whisper our names. By the time we drove home, back to Minnesota, we were silent. We didn't talk about what we saw, what we heard, what we felt. I started noticing strange things in my apartment, doors slightly ajar, objects moved, shadows in the corners that didn't belong. The last night before returning to work, I woke to tapping on the window, slow and deliberate, whispering that made my skin crawl. I never went back to those back roads. I never even think about that detour without feeling the same tight knot in my stomach. Jake and Lauren refused to talk about it. We all pretend it didn't happen, but the memory stays. And sometimes, when driving alone at night, I see a figure at the edge of the trees, pale, thin, standing silently watching, and I know, somehow, that it remembers me, just as I remember it. Story the end. The decision to take that road trip had seemed harmless at first. My friends had backed out at the last minute, each one of them with excuses that ranged from work obligations to family issues. And though I hesitated for a while, the pull of the open road had been too strong for me to ignore. I needed time away from the city, from the stress of my job, from the suffocating walls of my small apartment. So I packed my car with the essentials, clothes, snacks, my camera, and a couple of guidebooks, and left on a solo trip across several states. The plan was simple: follow the highway west, hit a few scenic stops, spend the nights in budget motels, and keep driving until I'd seen enough. Nothing about it struck me as risky. I'd driven long distances before, always enjoyed the quiet rhythm of passing miles, and there was something comforting about the anonymity of travel. No one knew me in the places I stopped. No one expected anything from me, and I could just be another face passing through. The first 2 days went by uneventfully. The late summer air was heavy with heat, the highway buzzing with the sound of cicadas when I rolled down the windows. I took detours to see roadside attractions, snapped photos of small towns, and ate at diners where the waitresses called me Han and refilled my coffee without asking. I slept in roadside motels that were bland but harmless, air conditioning humming, neon signs flickering outside the curtains, muffled conversations through thin walls. On the third day, somewhere in the heart of rural Oklahoma, the weather changed. Heavy clouds rolled in by mid-afternoon, smearing the horizon with a bruised gray, and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and distant farmland. I pulled off into a gas station to fill up, the attendant staring at me with a curious, almost unsettled expression as I swiped my card at the pump. I chalked it up to small-town suspicion, the way locals sometimes looked at travelers as if they were intruding. When I went inside for a drink, the woman behind the counter asked where I was headed. I told her I was driving west, maybe to New Mexico, depending on how I felt. She frowned, glancing at the storm clouds outside, then at me. "Careful out there," she said. Her voice was low and deliberate, not just small talk. "This weather turns fast, and these roads, they're not like the highway. Don't go wandering off onto the back roads if you can help it." I nodded politely, thanked her, and left. At the time, her words barely registered. I'd driven through storms before. I figured she was just the type who worried too much. By late afternoon, the rain started. Sheets of it slammed against my windshield, the wipers straining to keep up. The highway stretched on endlessly, slick with water, my headlights reflecting back at me in a haze of mist. I should have pulled off and found a place to wait it out, but the exits had become few and far between, and the thought of sitting alone in some forgotten gas station parking lot didn't appeal to me. Around 7, my GPS indicated there was a small town up ahead. Nothing big, just a cluster of streets and maybe a motel or two. That sounded like the safest option, so I took the next exit. The road into town wound through thick woods. Even in daylight, it might have been unsettling, but under the storm-darkened sky, it was oppressive. My headlights caught only slick black pavement and trees that leaned in close, their branches thrashing violently in the wind. I drove slower, my knuckles tight around the steering wheel. When I finally saw the glow of lights ahead, I felt relief, at least until I entered the town itself, if you could even call it a town. There was one main street, lined with old brick buildings whose faded signs hinted at businesses long since abandoned. A diner, a hardware store, a drugstore, all with darkened windows and peeling paint. The storm had knocked out power in places. Some buildings sat in total darkness, while others flickered faintly with emergency lights. There was a motel, though. Its sign buzzed and glowed in broken red neon. Sleepy Pines Motel. The lot was mostly empty. Just one beat-up pickup parked near the entrance. I pulled in and sat for a moment, engine idling, the rain pounding so hard on the roof of my car it drowned out everything else. I should have left right then. I should have turned back and driven until I found something better. But the storm was brutal, and the thought of navigating the highway again in that weather made my stomach knot. Inside, the motel smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like rust. The lobby was dim, lit by a single lamp on the counter. A man appeared from a back room, his appearance startling in its plainness. Thin, pale, hair slicked back as though he'd just stepped out of the rain, though he hadn't. He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Storm caught you, huh?" he said. His voice was dry, almost rasping. "Yeah," I replied. "Just need a room for the night." He slid a key across the counter, the kind attached to a large plastic fob with the room number written in faded marker. Room 7, round back, cash only, $40. That gave me pause. Most motels took cards, but I happened to have enough cash in my wallet. I handed it over, signed the guest book he pushed toward me, and took the key. The pages of the book were filled with unfamiliar names, shaky handwriting, and dates that didn't seem to line up in any logical order, like people had been checking in over years, not days. The hallway to the rooms smelled worse than the lobby. Damp carpet, cigarette smoke ground into the walls, something sour that made me breathe shallowly. My room was small, the bedspread a garish floral pattern that had seen better decades. The television was an old box set, the kind I hadn't seen since childhood. But it was dry, and that was enough. I tried to sleep, but the storm raged outside, rattling the windows, and the thin walls carried every sound from the hallway. I could hear footsteps passing back and forth, too frequent to belong to a single guest. At one point, I thought I heard someone stop outside my door, breathing faintly before moving on. Around midnight, the power went out. The sudden silence of the air conditioner woke me fully, and the room was plunged into darkness so complete it felt suffocating. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, the dim glow revealing peeling wallpaper and water stains on the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. That was when I heard it. A whisper. Faint, drawn out, almost indistinguishable from the rain. It seemed to come from just outside the door. I froze, phone clutched in my hand, heart thudding. The whisper came again, low and dragging, like words spoken underwater. I couldn't make them out, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was murmuring directly outside my room. I waited, holding my breath, until the sound faded. I thought about calling the front desk, but there was no phone in the room, and I doubted I'd get any help. The man at the counter hadn't struck me as particularly helpful or trustworthy. Instead, I sat in the chair by the window, watching the storm, too wired to sleep. Hours passed that way, my nerves stretched taut, every creak of the building making me flinch. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was waking to silence. The rain had stopped. The early light of dawn filtered weakly through the curtains. Relieved, I gathered my things quickly, ready to get back on the road. When I stepped outside, the motel lot was empty. The pickup I'd seen the night before was gone. The office door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze, but no one was inside. On the counter sat the guest book, open to the page where I'd signed my name. Only now my name was crossed out, not scribbled or blurred, a single neat line drawn straight through it. I left without checking out, without even locking the room behind me. I drove until I reached the highway, until the town was far behind, and only then did I let myself breathe again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that motel, that the whispers in the night hadn't been a dream, that someone or something had been waiting outside my door, just listening. And when I think back, the strangest part isn't the storm or the whispers or the empty town. It's the guest book. Because weeks later, when I told a friend about it and showed them the photo I'd taken of the page, they pointed out something I hadn't noticed in my panic. All the other names, those shaky signatures in faded ink, were the same. Slightly different each time, but the same hand, the same style of writing, spread across years of entries, and the line through my name was in that same handwriting. Story the end. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when Lisa and her friend Mark pulled their old Chevy Impala onto the shoulder of a deserted highway in northern Arizona. They had been driving for hours, the desert stretching endlessly around them, but the GPS insisted there was a shortcut through a nearby canyon that would shave an hour off their trip. Lisa, who had a habit of trusting technology over instinct, agreed to take it. The road narrowed immediately, gravel crunching under the tires, cliffs looming on one side and sheer drop-offs on the other. Shadows grew longer, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like rust and dry earth. Mark glanced over nervously. "You sure this is the right way? It looks abandoned." Lisa shrugged. "The GPS says we're on the fastest route. What's the worst that could happen?" Her words sounded braver than she felt, but Mark didn't reply. Neither of them noticed the temperature dropping sharply, a wind that seemed unnatural brushing over the car. They drove another 20 minutes, the road twisting unnervingly, before the car hit a stretch of fog so thick it felt almost liquid. The headlights barely pierced it, and the rearview mirror reflected an empty void. Lisa's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as she slowed down. Then, in the periphery of the fog, she saw a figure. Someone standing in the middle of the road. She slammed the brakes, the tires skidding on loose gravel, and the car stopped inches away from the figure. Mark gasped. "Did you see that? There's someone there." Lisa squinted. The figure was tall, oddly thin, and completely still. Then, as she tried to get a better look, it was gone. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and shook her head. Maybe it was just... A scratching noise came from the roof of the car. Lisa froze. The sound moved from the hood to the trunk, scraping like fingernails against metal. Mark's breathing quickened. Get out of here!" Lisa shook her head. "No, we can't just..." The trunk of the car popped open by itself. Cold air rushed in, carrying a stench that made both of them gag. Lisa slammed it shut and locked it, fumbling with the keys. The radio, which had been silent, crackled to life, broadcasting static and faint, distorted whispers. It sounded like a conversation, but the words were unintelligible. Mark grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now." They drove, the fog thickening to the point where the headlights reflected only a gray abyss. The scratches continued intermittently, but it was when Lisa saw movement in the back seat that she screamed. Mark spun around, but there was nothing there, just the faint smell of decay lingering in the cramped space of the car. Hours seemed to pass in silence, though the dashboard clock spun erratically. Every time Lisa glanced at it, the hands jumped ahead by several hours, minutes, even days. The canyon road had changed. Cliffs seemed closer, shadows deeper, and every bend in the road led to the same stretch they had just passed. Then the car stalled, completely dead. Lisa tried the ignition, turned the keys repeatedly, but the engine was unresponsive. The fog was now nearly opaque, so dense they could no longer see the edges of the road. Mark tried calling for help, but his phone showed no signal. "We have to walk," he said, reluctantly. "We need to find a town, or at least a gas station." Lisa nodded, though she had no idea which direction to go. They grabbed flashlights from the glove compartment and stepped out. The air was icy, each breath visible in the beam of light. The canyon walls rose above them like silent sentinels. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sounds stretching impossibly far. A faint light appeared ahead. It flickered, soft and yellow, like a lantern. Relief washed over them. They quickened their pace, shouting for help, but as they approached, they realized it wasn't a house or even a cabin. It was a small stone structure, almost like a shrine, covered in old, dried blood stains. Candles surrounded it, flickering despite the windless night. Mark took a step back. "We shouldn't... This is bad. This is really bad." Lisa, feeling drawn inexplicably toward the shrine, ignored him. As she stepped closer, the whispers from the car returned, louder, clearer, forming words this time. "Stay. Forever." Suddenly the candles flared, and the figures appeared. At first they were shadows, but as the light grew, the forms resolved into people, tall, thin, pale, with hollow eyes and mouths that moved in silent screams. They surrounded the shrine, their gaze fixed on Lisa and Mark. Panic surged through both of them. Mark grabbed Lisa. "Run." They turned back toward the car, but the road had changed again. The canyon stretched endlessly, the path they had driven now completely unrecognizable. The car was gone, replaced by jagged rocks and a black void where the road should have been. They ran blindly, tripping over rocks, scraping their arms and faces, the whispers echoing in their heads, getting louder, almost deafening. Hours, or was it days, passed. The canyon never ended. Their flashlights flickered, then died. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them. The figures were always there, just beyond the edge of sight, disappearing whenever they looked directly at them. Lisa began to see things in the shadows, small, crawling shapes with too many limbs, staring at them with countless eyes. Mark refused to acknowledge them, mumbling that they weren't real, but Lisa knew otherwise. One night, or what she thought was night, they stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. A tent stood, torn and blackened, with remnants of a fire that had long burned out. Inside, skeletal remains and tattered clothes were scattered around, twisted into unnatural angles. Lisa recognized the faces. They were her friends, neighbors, and co-workers, or at least what remained of them, from memories and faces she had seen online. Her stomach churned, but Mark pulled her away before she could examine too closely. They kept moving, hoping to find the highway again. But the canyon seemed alive, shifting, bending, a labyrinth with no exit. The cliffs loomed closer and closer, whispering their fears back at them. At times, Lisa swore she could feel cold hands brushing against her skin, tugging, pulling, even though Mark never felt them. Eventually, they came upon a river, black and slow-moving, reflecting nothing but darkness. As they approached, the figures stepped out from the canyon walls and into the water, moving toward them. Their eyes were hollow, mouths opening impossibly wide, letting out silent screams that shook Lisa's mind. Mark grabbed a branch to fend them off, but it passed through the figures like smoke. Lisa realized then that the river was a boundary. Once they crossed it, they would leave, but the figures would not allow it. Desperation fueled her. She grabbed Mark's hand, and they jumped into the freezing water. The current was stronger than anything they had encountered, dragging them under, yet somehow keeping them afloat, pushing them forward. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The world blurred. The whispers became chanting, then singing, then complete silence. When they finally stumbled onto solid ground, it was dawn, or something like it. The desert stretched before them, empty and ordinary. They were back on the highway, miles from where they thought they had entered. The fog was gone. The canyon behind them looked like a normal mountain pass. Their car was parked on the shoulder. They ran to it, shaking, hearts racing. But when Lisa opened the door, it was empty. Not just empty of people, but every personal item gone. No keys, no GPS, no belongings. Only dust. They walked to the nearest town, flagged down a sheriff's car. The officers listened to their story, skepticism etched on their faces. The highway they had taken existed on the map, but the canyon route had no trace. Nothing. Lisa and Mark were taken to a local diner, given food, and questioned thoroughly. Every detail they provided was met with doubt. Other travelers had reported strange fog and disorientation in the area, but no one had ever emerged claiming to have encountered whatever it was they had faced. They were released to a motel, but neither could sleep. Lisa saw shadows in the corners of her room, and Mark heard faint scratching on the walls. Every time they closed their eyes, the whispers returned. Stay. Forever. Over the next few weeks, both struggled to return to normal life. The desert and canyon haunted their dreams. They couldn't explain the scratches on their arms, the strange marks appearing overnight, or the glimpses of figures in mirrors that disappeared when looked at directly. Their phones occasionally flickered with static, showing images of the canyon in distorted, impossible angles. Friends and family noticed changes. They spoke less, ate less, and grew pale and withdrawn. They tried to rationalize it, blaming exhaustion, dehydration, or trauma. But Lisa and Mark knew better. Whatever had been in that canyon, whatever they had encountered, had marked them. Months later, Lisa received a postcard in the mail. No return address. On the front, a photograph of a canyon road she didn't recognize. Written on the back in neat, almost childlike handwriting, "We saw you. Come back soon. Mark got one too. Same canyon, same message. The nightmares never stopped." The whispers never faded. And every time they tried to drive, even through familiar roads, the canyon appeared at the edge of the horizon, fog rolling in, figures waiting, patient and silent. just beyond reach. Lisa and Mark never spoke about the canyon to anyone again. But they never forgot the sound of the scratches, the cold hands, or the hollow eyes that had stared into their souls. They lived in fear that one day, if they weren't careful, the canyon would call them back, and they would have no choice but to return. Sometimes, late at night, they would hear the faint hum of chanting through the desert wind, as if the canyon itself was reaching out, waiting for the next travelers foolish enough to trust a GPS and take the wrong road. The truth, they realized, is that some places aren't meant to be found. Some roads lead not to a destination, but to something that watches, waits, and never forgets. And if it chooses you, it never lets go. Story the end. It started as a normal road trip for 3 friends, Mark, Jason, and Lisa, fresh out of college, looking to stretch their legs and see parts of the country they'd only read about. They piled into Mark's older, beat-up SUV on a late Friday morning, the kind of car that rattled a little more with every mile and had a faint smell of burned rubber mixed with pine air freshener. They were heading west, planning to follow back roads through the Appalachians, hoping to find scenic overlooks, quirky small towns, and maybe some cheap motels along the way. None of them were particularly experienced travelers, but the idea of adventure made the thought of sleep deprivation and fast food seem trivial. The first several hours were easy. They drove through rolling hills and stretches of farmland in the early morning sun, laughing at roadside attractions, snapping photos of abandoned barns, and teasing one another over pop songs on the radio. By the time they reached the small town of Ashford, the sky had grown overcast, and the air had taken on a chill that made the 3 of them turn up the heat in the car. They grabbed some sandwiches from a gas station and fueled up the SUV, but as Mark swiped his card at the pump, the machine blinked an error message, then shut off entirely. He cursed. Jason joked about bad juju, and Lisa laughed it off, thinking it was just a mechanical glitch. The station itself looked old, with peeling paint and a faded sign advertising Ashford Fuel, open 24 hours. The attendant, a thin man with deep-set eyes, gave them a nod but didn't speak. Something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost mechanical, made Lisa's stomach tighten, but she forced herself to ignore it. They got back on the road, thinking little of it, and continued their route toward the mountains. The GPS, which they mostly ignored in favor of adventure, started giving odd instructions around mid-afternoon. It directed them onto a narrow road flanked by dense forest, claiming it would save 15 minutes compared to staying on the highway. The asphalt was cracked and patches of grass grew through fissures in the pavement. Mark slowed the SUV, and Jason, leaning back in the passenger seat, commented on how creepy the area looked. Lisa, in the back, peered out the window, noting that there wasn't a house or even a mailbox for miles, just trees and fog that seemed to thicken the further they went. After a few miles, the fog grew denser, reducing visibility to barely 100 feet. The sun, already low in the sky, disappeared entirely behind the cloud cover. The trio exchanged uneasy glances. Jason, half joking but with an edge of real concern, said, "I don't like this. We shouldn't be here." Mark insisted they just follow the GPS. It had never led them astray before. They pressed on, the sound of the SUV's engine seeming unnaturally loud in the silence of the forest. At some point, Lisa thought she saw movement along the tree line, shadows that didn't match the shape of any trees, but when she pointed it out, Jason waved it off. "It's probably just the fog messing with your eyes," he said. But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As twilight settled, the road became worse, pitted with potholes and strewn with fallen branches. Then they came across the first sign that made them pause. On the right side of the road was a small wooden sign, half rotted, with letters barely legible. "Welcome to Briar's Hollow." The paint was chipped and faded, and it looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. "Briar's Hollow?" Mark read aloud, sounding amused. "Never heard of it. Must be one of those tiny towns GPS likes to throw in for fun." But Lisa felt a prickling in the back of her neck. There was no street, no house, no light, just an open dirt path that veered off the main road. Against their better judgment, Mark drove down it, thinking it might be a shortcut. The forest pressed in on both sides, the fog clinging to the underbrush. After several minutes, the path led them to what looked like an abandoned settlement. Small cabins, some collapsed or covered in vines, lined the dirt road. Broken windows glinted in the last rays of sunlight. A rusted swing set creaked in the wind. Jason, trying to lighten the mood, joked that this looked like a horror movie set. Lisa didn't laugh. She noticed that, despite the visible decay, there were footprints in the dirt. Barefoot, small, moving toward the cabin at the end of the row. "Guys, someone's been here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark, ever the skeptic, shrugged. "Probably kids. Maybe people still come here on weekends," he said. But even he looked unsettled. They debated whether to turn back, but the sun had almost vanished, and the forest now pressed a dark, suffocating canopy overhead. They decided to keep moving, figuring they could drive through and be on the main road again in minutes. The cabin at the end of the row had a porch swing that swayed gently, though there was no wind. As they approached, the footprints ended abruptly at the door. Mark parked the SUV, the tires crunching over loose gravel. Jason grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and shone it around. "Seriously, this is messed up," he muttered. Lisa, peering through the side window, noticed that the air felt wrong. Thick. Heavy, like it had weight. She could almost hear breathing, quiet, deliberate, but when she looked around, there was nothing there. The cabin door was ajar. Mark, trying to be brave, pushed it open, the hinges protesting with a screech. Inside, the air was stale, the smell of mildew overpowering. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and something that looked like old newspapers was piled in one corner. Jason's flashlight flickered across the room and froze on a figure. Or maybe just a shadow. It was hard to tell. The shape was tall and thin, hunched slightly, and seemed to be moving ever so slightly. "It's just a coat rack," Mark said quickly, but the sound of that whisper of movement made Lisa flinch. She wanted to leave, run back to the SUV, but Mark and Jason were already moving toward the back of the cabin. They found nothing at first, just more decay, cobwebs, broken chairs. Then Jason called out, startled, "Guys, look at this." On the wall, scratched deep into the wood, were words written over and over, "Don't leave. Stay. Stay with us." The handwriting was uneven, frantic, almost childlike. Lisa's stomach dropped. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The three of them exchanged worried glances. "Okay, we are leaving," she finally managed to say. But when Mark turned the knob on the cabin door, it wouldn't budge. The door, which had been open when they came in, was now sealed tight. The air inside seemed to press down on them, colder than before. Lisa could hear faint whispers in the corners of the room, words she couldn't understand but felt like threats. Panic started to set in. Jason banged on the door, trying to force it open, while Mark ran to the back windows. Every window was either boarded up or too thick with grime to see through. Then they heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the floorboards above them. No one had entered. No one was visible outside. But the steps moved directly above them, pacing, pausing, circling. Lisa grabbed Jason's arm. "We need to get out. Now!" she screamed. The footsteps stopped suddenly, head replaced by silence so complete it felt deafening. Then came the sound of whispering, just behind them, close enough that they could feel breath on their necks. "Stay. Stay. Forever." They spun around, but no one was there. In sheer terror, Mark rammed the door with his shoulder. For a moment it held, then gave way with a crack, sending them tumbling into the gravel outside. They didn't stop to look back. Jason hit the ignition, and the SUV roared to life. They sped down the dirt road, headlights cutting through the thickening fog. Behind them, the forest seemed alive, shadows stretching toward the car, dark shapes flitting between the trees. Every turn, every bump in the road made it feel like something was brushing against the sides of the SUV. Lisa shrieked, pressing herself into the seat, heart hammering, while Mark kept his eyes fixed ahead. They finally reached the main road just as darkness swallowed the last of the sky. Relief washed over them, though every nerve in their body remained on edge. They didn't speak much, just drove, the silence in the car heavy. As they passed through the next town, lights and life greeting them, Jason tried to joke, trying to make light of the horror, but his voice trembled. "It's just fog, old cabins, maybe some sick joke," he said. Lisa didn't respond, and Mark kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure in the trees following them. For the next several hours, the road remained unnervingly empty. Gas stations were shuttered, small towns appeared abandoned, and a persistent fog followed them despite the rising moon. Every time they slowed, they thought they saw shadows moving just beyond the headlights. Eventually, they stopped at a roadside diner in a small town called Red Pine, the neon sign buzzing weakly in the night. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, trying to regain some semblance of calm. Lisa kept glancing at the road outside, and when she looked out the window, she saw something that froze her blood. The silhouette of a figure standing in the fog, watching the diner. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the mist swirling in the streetlights. She didn't say anything, but the others saw it too. Their unease returned tenfold, a silent acknowledgement that whatever they'd encountered wasn't something they could rationalize. They decided to keep moving through the night, taking turns driving, and eventually, as dawn broke, the fog began to lift. They were tired, nearly delirious from fear and lack of sleep. The mountains behind them looked peaceful under the morning sun, verdant and welcoming, as if nothing had happened at all. They stopped at a gas station in a larger town to refuel, and Jason, trying to shake off the terror, mentioned Briar's Hollow. The attendant, a middle-aged woman with a tired expression, frowned. Briar's Hollow? You mean the old settlement? Nobody's lived there in over 50 years. People don't go there. Not anymore. Lisa swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. We were just there, she said softly. The woman's eyes went cold, and she shook her head. You're lucky to have gotten out. Folks say people vanish there. Get trapped. The forest, it doesn't let you leave. Most that go never come back. Mark and Jason exchanged a grim look. Lisa thought she saw tears brimming in Jason's eyes, though he quickly blinked them away. They paid, got back in the SUV, and drove on, the events of the night haunting every mile. For the next week, they barely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts, the memory of Briar's Hollow, a shadow that followed them. Every foggy morning, every abandoned stretch of road reminded them that some places in the country weren't meant to be found, and some shadows were more than just tricks of the light. None of them ever returned to the Appalachians, and the idea of adventure never held the same appeal again. The memory of the whispers, the footprints, and the sealed cabin lingered, an unshakable reminder that some roads should never be traveled and some forests never entered, no matter how curious you are. Years later, Lisa would drive past the general area on a cross-country trip, heart tightening at the thought. She'd glance at the dense forest, the winding back roads, and she swore she could see a shadow moving just at the edge of her vision, watching. She'd never told anyone else, not fully, not the terror of the whispers, the feeling of being pressed under the air in that cabin, the shapes that moved behind the fog. Mark and Jason had their own memories, locked away, shared only in fleeting glances when the topic of travel came up. They all knew some things were best left buried, some roads never revisited. And yet, every so often, when the fog rolls in low and thick over the Appalachian foothills, Lisa wonders if Briar's Hollow is still out there, waiting for the next travelers to lose their way, the next friends to chase adventure into a forest that doesn't let go. She can still hear it sometimes in her dreams, the faint whispering, calling, urging her back. Stay. Stay with us. Story the end. It was mid-October when I decided to take a solo road trip from Boston to the Appalachian region. I had been craving a break from the city, its noise, its pace, its endless obligation to be productive, and the mountains had always felt like a kind of sanctuary. I packed my car with the bare essentials, a tent, a sleeping bag, a small cooler with some food, and a backpack with a few changes of clothes and a flashlight. My phone was fully charged, and I had a paper map tucked into the glove compartment, just in case. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going beyond a long drive into the mountains. I wanted this to be private, a pure escape. The drive out of Boston in the early evening was uneventful, as usual. Traffic was thick at first, but by the time I hit the smaller highways heading toward New Hampshire, the road had thinned considerably. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that makes the edges of the world look fuzzy. I remember feeling a kind of uneasy excitement, the kind you get when you know you're on the threshold of something completely unknown. I stopped at a gas station in a town I barely recognized, somewhere near the New Hampshire border. The place was small, the kind of station with a single pump lane and a store that smelled like stale coffee and fried food. I filled up the tank, bought a sandwich, and asked the clerk for directions to the nearest place to camp. He gave me vague instructions. Keep heading north, follow the signs for Route 112. There's a forest area with campsites a few miles down. Not many people go that far, though. I thanked him and left, feeling slightly unsettled by the way he just stared at me, like he expected something terrible to happen. By the time I reached the turnoff for Route 1112, the sun was just setting. The mountains were already dark silhouettes against the dimming sky. The road wound through dense forests, and the trees arched over it like a tunnel. I remember thinking that the forest seemed unusually quiet. No birds, no rustling in the underbrush, nothing except the occasional gust of wind that rattled the leaves. My headlights cut through the gloom, but there were long stretches where I could barely see the pavement in front of me. After an hour of driving, I came across a small clearing by the side of the road that looked like it had been used for camping before. There were fire pits, scattered logs, and a faint trail leading into the woods. It was isolated, probably why no one was there. I pulled over, grabbed my gear, and started setting up my tent. By the time I finished, it was fully dark. The moon was just a thin crescent, offering little light. I had a small lantern, but it cast long, eerie shadows across the trees. I tried to settle in for the night. I had a book with me, and I thought I would read to calm myself. But the forest was too quiet, too silent. Even the wind seemed hesitant. As I was reading, I thought I heard something. A faint crunching of leaves, like someone walking toward me through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably an animal or maybe just my imagination. I tried to focus on the book, but the feeling of being watched settled over me like a cold blanket. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone or something moving outside my tent. It wasn't subtle. It was deliberate, slow steps circling the camp. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around. The beam cut through the dark, but I saw nothing. My heart was racing. I told myself to stay calm, that it was probably just a deer or some other animal, but there was a rhythm to the steps, too regular, too deliberate to be random. I zipped up the tent flap and sat in silence, listening. The steps stopped for a moment, then started again, moving away slowly. I thought about calling 911, but my cell service was spotty. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a faint whisper from just outside the tent. It sounded like my name. "Hey, hey." I froze, my hand tightening around the flashlight. I called out, but no one answered. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed awake, listening to the forest, straining to hear anything that might give me a clue what was out there. The hours dragged on. Every time I thought I was alone, I would hear something. A twig snapping, leaves rustling, the faintest whisper. By dawn, I was exhausted and jittery. I packed up quickly and decided to drive further into the mountains, thinking maybe a proper campsite would be safer. I found a small park office just off the main road. It was empty, but I left a note with my intended route, just in case. As I drove further, the forest thickened and the roads became narrower, winding through valleys and over small creeks. The scenery was breathtaking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a figure standing among the trees, watching me. When I blinked, it was gone. Around mid-afternoon, I found a larger campsite near a creek. A few families were there, and I felt some relief seeing other people. I set up my tent, cooked some food, and tried to relax. That night, I felt safer, but the unease never fully went away. When I went to sleep, I kept my flashlight and a pocket knife within reach. Around midnight, I was awakened by a low, guttural sound. It was coming from the forest, close enough to make my chest tighten. I peeked out of the tent and saw nothing, but the sound persisted. It was a wet, dragging noise like something heavy moving across the forest floor. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound, and for a brief second, I saw a figure. A person, hunched, moving slowly, almost crawling on all fours. Then it disappeared into the shadows. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I packed up and decided to leave the campsite and head toward the next town. As I drove, I noticed more odd things. Abandoned cars on the side of the road, signs that had been vandalized or broken, small structures that looked like they had been used but were long deserted. The further I went, the less I saw any signs of civilization. I eventually pulled over near a small creek to rest. I was drained, both physically and mentally, but the forest around me was so quiet it made my skin crawl. While sitting there, I noticed a set of footprints leading from the forest toward my car. They were fresh. My pulse spiked. I looked around but saw no one. The prints were human, but too large, almost misshapen. My instinct was to get back in the car and leave immediately, which I did, though I drove nervously, scanning every shadow. By the time I reached a small town, it was evening. I stopped at a diner to eat and calm myself. The locals were friendly but curious about my trip. I didn't share much, just said I was exploring the mountains. One of them mentioned a stretch of forest nearby where travelers had gone missing over the years. I laughed nervously, claiming I hadn't been there. But inside, I felt a chill. Could I have been in that area? The descriptions fit too closely. I decided to spend the night in a motel, thinking it would be safer than camping. I picked the first one I saw, a small place with dim lighting and a single clerk at the front desk. The room was old but clean, and for the first time in days, I felt some semblance of safety. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and tried to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a loud banging on the motel door. I froze. My heart was hammering. The knocking stopped, then a faint scratching sound began, like someone clawing at the wood. I grabbed the phone to call the front desk, but the line was dead. I reached for the knife I had packed and edged toward the door. The scratching stopped. There was silence, thick and suffocating. Then I heard it. My name was whispered clearly coming from the hallway. "Hey, come out." I didn't move. I didn't respond. I stayed in the corner, flashlight trembling in my hand. After what felt like hours, the noises ceased. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, I checked out immediately, paid for the room in cash, and got on the highway out of there. I didn't stop until I reached a larger city. Even back in Boston, the fear didn't leave me. Weeks later, I started noticing strange things. Shadows at the edge of my vision, objects slightly moved, a faint whisper when I was alone in my apartment. One evening, while scrolling through local news, I saw a story about hikers who had gone missing in the Appalachian region I had traveled. The details were eerily similar to my experiences. The same isolated areas, the same forest clearing, even the same descriptions of strange figures. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I had been lucky. I'd escaped whatever haunted that forest, whatever followed those who wandered too deep. But I knew it hadn't stopped, and I knew, somewhere out there, it was still waiting. Months passed and I haven't returned to the mountains. I drive past them occasionally on trips, keeping my eyes forward, never stopping. But at night, when the wind howls outside, I still hear it. The soft crunch of leaves, the whisper of my name, reminding me that I was never truly alone. I stopped telling people about the trip after that. They would laugh, call it paranoia or imagination, but I know what I experienced was real. And sometimes, when the forest is quiet and the shadows are long, I swear I can feel those eyes on me again, just beyond the edge of the world I call safe. Story the end. It started with the kind of restless energy that makes a person decide to leave everything behind for a weekend, a road trip with no real destination in mind. I was driving north from Atlanta in my beat-up SUV, the kind that had seen more potholes than smooth asphalt. My plan was simple. Leave Friday afternoon, hit the road, find some quiet place, maybe a small town off the highway, and spend a night somewhere I'd never been before. Just me, the car, and the road. No schedules, no distractions. It felt liberating. The first few hours were mundane. Radio stations flicked in and out as I passed through stretches of forest and low hills. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon when I hit a narrow stretch of road with barely a shoulder. The trees closed in so tight on both sides that my headlights barely pierced the darkness beyond 50 feet. I remember thinking it was the kind of road where people disappeared in horror stories, Menwin, the kind of place locals warned outsiders to avoid after dark. But curiosity has a way of outweighing caution. I kept going. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I saw the first sign that something was off. A figure in the distance, standing near the edge of the road. I assumed it was a hitchhiker, though the road was so isolated I almost laughed at the absurdity. I slowed down, rolling the window down to offer a wave or a nod. The figure didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, unnaturally still. When I got closer, I could see that it wasn't waving or signaling. It was facing the woods, its back to me. A chill ran down my spine, the kind you get when instinct screams stop. But logic says keep going, it's probably nothing. I passed without incident and tried to shake the feeling, convincing myself I was tired and imagining things. But 5 minutes later, the road twisted sharply, and in my headlights, there it was again. Same figure, same stance, same unblinking stillness. My heart was pounding now. I slowed, gripping the wheel tight, debating whether to turn around. As I got even closer, I realized something horrifying. This time, it was in the middle of the road. I swerved just in time, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, and the figure didn't move at all. Panic set in. I floored it, my tires squealing as I tried to put distance between me and whatever that was. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees on either side pressing in like dark walls. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights, but there was nothing. The figure hadn't followed, or at least it didn't appear that it had. I kept going, the feeling of being watched gnawing at the edges of my mind. Eventually, I reached a small, almost ghostly town, the kind where the streets were empty, the lights dim, and the buildings looked abandoned, though not necessarily in a rundown way. The motel sign flickered weakly, like it was barely holding on. I pulled into the parking lot, relief washing over me that at least I could stop, rest, and maybe figure out what I had just seen. The lobby was dim, fluorescent lights buzzing. A woman with tired eyes checked me in, asking the usual questions about how long I'd stay and whether I wanted a room with a view of the parking lot. I declined. I just wanted the room, somewhere safe, somewhere I could lock the door and forget about the night. She handed me the key with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. The room itself smelled faintly of mildew. The bed was unmade, the sheets crumpled as if someone had left in a hurry. I ignored it, thinking it was probably the previous occupant. I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the drive replaying in my mind. My phone had no service, of course, which only made the isolation feel more acute. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the presence of something outside, watching. I kept telling myself it was just paranoia, the kind that comes when you're alone in an unfamiliar town. But the noises started soon after, soft thuds against the walls like footsteps pacing outside. I pressed my ear to the door. The hallway was silent. Nothing. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't a normal knock. It had a rhythm, almost like someone was counting or marking time. I froze. After a moment, it stopped. I convinced myself to lie down, telling myself it was probably a branch brushing against the building in the wind. But then it came again, louder this time. And from inside the room, I swear I heard breathing, faint but deliberate, as if someone or something was standing just behind the closed door. I couldn't move. I wanted to call the front desk, but the phone was dead. My car keys, my only weapon, sat on the dresser. I picked them up, my hands trembling, ready to defend myself against whatever intruder might appear. I waited. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. I have no idea. Eventually, the knocking stopped, the breathing faded, and I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke to the sunlight streaming weakly through the dusty curtains. The room looked normal in the light, mundane. I felt foolish for being terrified. I showered, dressed, and left the motel, eager to get back on the road and put as much distance as possible between myself and that place. But as I drove, the figure returned. At first I thought it was a trick of the trees, shadows in the corner of my eye. But then I saw it again, standing at the edge of the road, this time closer, its form unnervingly human, yet impossibly still. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. The figure didn't move as I passed. It didn't blink, didn't flinch. It was just there, watching. Panic made me drive faster, taking every turn, every exit I could find to escape the stretch of road it haunted. But no matter what I did, it reappeared at every turn. I began to feel like I was trapped in some twisted version of the road, a loop I couldn't escape. Night fell again, and I found myself in another deserted stretch of forest road. The headlights caught something moving in the distance. A car. Not my own, something old, a rusted sedan, its headlights dim and flickering. I slowed, hoping maybe I could pass without incident. The car stayed just ahead, moving too slowly, like it was toying with me. When I tried to overtake it, it sped up, keeping pace perfectly. Then I noticed the driver, or rather, The lack of a driver. There was no one behind the wheel. My heart pounded as I swerved to avoid a collision, the car behind me accelerating to match my speed. I couldn't see any features, just a vague silhouette, empty in its form. I floored the accelerator, weaving through the trees, praying for a highway, a town, anything. Finally, I hit the highway. Cars moved in both directions, lights flooding the night. The strange car behind me vanished as if it had never existed. Relief washed over me, but it was temporary. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I caught sight of the figure again. Standing on the side of the highway, watching. No movement, just presence. I kept driving straight through the night, stopping only when I reached a 24-hour diner. I sat in a booth, sipping coffee, trying to calm myself. I told the waitress about the drive, the figure, the car. She listened quietly, then said, "You shouldn't have come up that road. People don't like to talk about it, but sometimes it doesn't let you leave." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. But her eyes were serious, almost too serious, and she added, "Some things on those roads, they follow you. They don't want you to get away." I left the diner feeling a sense of unease that never really left. The roads I took home felt different, heavier somehow. Every shadow on the side of the road, every figure at a distance made me tense. I kept thinking I saw it, the figure, the car, always there, always watching. Weeks later, I told myself it was over. I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, stress, and too much solitude. But one night, while driving to visit a friend in a small town, I saw it again. On a dark road, standing motionless near the tree line. My stomach dropped. This time, I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I drove past, eyes fixed on the road ahead. When I finally glanced in the mirror, it was gone. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, waiting for the next time I was alone on a stretch of road, ready to remind me that some journeys aren't meant to be taken lightly, that some roads have a memory and some presences never let go. Even now, years later, I avoid that part of the country altogether. I stick to highways, bright streets, populated areas. But when I close my eyes, I can still see the figure, the rusted car, the empty, unblinking presence that made me question everything I knew about the roads, about reality, about being alone. And I know deep down that no matter how far I drive, no matter where I go, there are places that will never let you leave, things that will follow you, waiting for the next night, the next dark stretch of road when you think you're alone. Story, the end. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just me and my friend Mark driving from Chicago down to Nashville for a music festival. I remember thinking how perfect it would be. 2 weeks of highways, neon lights, small towns, and nothing but the road ahead. We loaded up my old Jeep Grand Cherokee with snacks, sleeping bags, and our guitars, and by mid-morning we were already out of the city, the skyline shrinking behind us like some memory fading too quickly. At first, the drive was the kind of mundane fun you get when you're 27 and still feel invincible. We were blasting classic rock, rolling down the windows, trading stories about college and jobs we didn't like. There was a light drizzle, the kind that made the asphalt shine under streetlights even though it was early afternoon. That rain made the trees along I-57 look deeper green than usual, almost surreal. We joked about being in some indie movie as the Jeep hummed along the highway. Around dusk, when we were somewhere near southern Illinois, the rain picked up and visibility dropped to almost nothing. The GPS had been glitching all day, flipping between 2 different routes, so I decided to take the back roads instead of the interstate. I thought it would be a scenic detour. The map on my phone wasn't loading correctly, but the small highways looked simple enough. We turned off the main road and followed a winding stretch flanked by dense forest. There were no other cars, and the headlights barely reached beyond a few dozen feet. After maybe 20 minutes, we noticed a gas station up ahead. Its neon sign flickered in a way that made it seem abandoned, even though we could see a few pumps. I suggested we stop, partly because my tank was low, partly because my stomach was starting to grumble. Mark agreed, but as we pulled in, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The air smelled like damp wood and something metallic, like iron or blood. The place was dark, except for the sign and a single light above the door. There wasn't a car at any of the pumps. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. There was a counter, some shelves with snacks, and a soda fridge, but no one was behind the counter. I called out a few times, and finally a man emerged from a back room. He was middle-aged, tall, with a thin frame and a pale face that looked almost sickly. He didn't smile. "Can I help you?" His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. We paid for gas and snacks, trying not to stare at the peeling paint on the walls or the strange, dusty smell that hung in the air. I noticed some photos on the wall, black and white, faded, showing the gas station from decades ago. But something was off. The people in the pictures weren't just old. Their eyes seemed hollow. I shook it off, probably just the dim lighting. Back on the road, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. The forest on either side of the road felt oppressive, the trees like dark fingers pressing in. I tried to keep conversation going with Mark, but he was quiet, scanning the dark tree line like he felt something watching. The GPS still refused to load correctly, but I tried to reassure him it was fine. We drove for maybe another hour when the Jeep's headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. Mark yelped. The figure was just a man, or what looked like a man, completely still. Rain soaked his clothes, hair plastered to his face. Before I could get out of the car or do anything, he stepped aside, almost gliding, and disappeared into the woods. My stomach sank. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, pale. "Yeah," he said, "but we should keep moving." We drove on, faster now, headlights cutting through the rain. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and narrowing until it felt like we were the only humans left on the planet. The GPS was still glitching, but I didn't dare stop to check it. Then, the Jeep started making a weird grinding noise, the kind that sounds like metal rubbing metal. I pulled over onto a muddy shoulder. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead as I popped the hood. Everything looked fine, but the sound wouldn't stop. Mark was pacing nervously, muttering something about this being a bad idea. I told him to calm down, that I'd figure it out. I even joked about it being haunted, but my laugh sounded hollow in the wet, dark air. Out of nowhere, a tree branch snapped behind us. Both of us jumped. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. The beam caught nothing, just the dripping forest. But then I saw them. Footprints in the mud, wet and dark, leading toward the Jeep. And not human footprints, not exactly. They were longer, wider, with clawed toes. I froze. Mark whispered my name, but I couldn't look at him. The sound of movement in the forest grew louder, something large shifting between the trees. Then the Jeep's lights flickered, dimmed, and died. The rain felt heavier all of a sudden. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. No GPS, no service, nothing. Mark was panicking now. "We need to get out of here," he said. "We need to walk." I nodded, but deep down, I didn't want to move. Something about the air, thick and electric, told me moving might be worse. We stepped out, headlights off, trying to stay quiet. The footprints were still there, leading along the road, then into the woods. I wanted to follow them, wanted to see what was causing all this, but fear pinned me in place. The sounds kept moving, circling us. Twigs snapped, something low growled. Then, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw it. A figure, hunched, impossibly tall, with long arms dragging on the ground, pale, hair matted, and eyes that reflected the flashlight in a dull red glow. It wasn't human. Its mouth was wide, stretched in a silent scream, and it moved with a fluid, unnatural motion. Mark screamed and bolted down the road. I followed, tripping over mud and roots, heart hammering in my chest. Behind us, the thing moved faster than any human should. The sound of its footsteps, or whatever it made, echoed in the rain-soaked forest surrounding us. We ran for what felt like hours, though in reality, it might have been minutes. The road twisted and turned, but there was no sign of civilization. No lights, no sounds of cars. Just us, the rain, and whatever was hunting us. Eventually, we stumbled upon an abandoned farmhouse. The porch light was dead, windows boarded up, but the door was slightly ajar. Desperation pushed us inside. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust coated the furniture, cobwebs hung from the ceiling. We barricaded the door with a broken chair, trying to catch our breath. Mark was shaking uncontrollably. "What the hell is that thing?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't know. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was hard to tell. The thing stayed outside, scratching at the walls, moving around the house with an unnatural speed. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it. Its breathing, low and wet, mixed with the rain. I wanted to leave, but the thought of stepping outside made my skin crawl. At some point, exhaustion took over. We slept fitfully on the dusty floor, listening to the sounds outside. When we woke, the rain had stopped. The first light of morning seeped through cracks in the boards. The forest looked normal now, almost serene. I told Mark we had to leave before it came back. We opened the door carefully. Nothing. No footprints, no sounds, no sign of what had been chasing us. It was as if the night had never happened. We ran back to the Jeep. Miraculously, it started without issue. The road ahead was dry, and for the first time since that afternoon, we saw another car, a beat-up pickup, windows fogged, an old man driving. I waved frantically, and he nodded, slowing down. We asked him for directions to the nearest town. He frowned, pointed vaguely down the road, and muttered, "Best to stick to the highway. You don't want to be out here after dark." We drove for hours, not stopping until we reached Nashville. The music festival was loud, full of life, and the crowds were almost comforting in their chaos. But even surrounded by people, I couldn't shake the memory of the forest, the rain, and the creature. That night, in a hotel room, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed alive. Every creak of the building sounded like the thing moving just outside the walls. After returning home to Chicago, I tried to research the area we had passed through. Small towns, old forests, nothing unusual, at least nothing reported. But I knew what I had seen. Mark said he'd never forget it either. We never took back roads again. Months later, I found an old newspaper article in a local library. It detailed a series of disappearances along that stretch of Illinois highway in the 1970s. People vanished without a trace, mostly young travelers, hikers, and those who got lost during storms. The descriptions were vague, but one thing repeated. Witnesses claimed to see a tall, pale figure with unnaturally long limbs, moving faster than any human, disappearing into the woods. I never told anyone else. Who would believe it? But I still remember the sound of the creature outside that farmhouse, its breathing mixing with the rain, and the hollow red of its eyes reflecting my flashlight. I drive highways carefully now, always sticking to main roads, avoiding dark forests after storms. I know what's out there. Something old, something patient, something that waits for nightfall and storms to strike. Every time I close my eyes at night, I feel it again. The brush of something tall and cold moving just beyond my vision, the snapping of branches, the growl that never truly leaves. And I think about Mark, who still checks the rearview mirror obsessively, even when we're driving through well-lit streets. We survived that night, but the forest didn't forget us. I know it never will. Story the end. It was supposed to be a routine road trip. I had been itching for some time alone, away from the constant hum of the city and the suffocating schedule at my job. The plan was simple. Drive from Austin to the Smoky Mountains, spend a few days hiking and taking photos, and then circle back. I had packed light, mostly camera gear, and a small tent, and decided to take a route that hugged the back roads instead of the interstate. It felt like the only way to truly experience the open road, and besides, the GPS signal was going to be weak in some stretches anyway, which I thought would add to the adventure. The first few hours were uneventful. I passed small towns with shuttered shops and gas stations that smelled of diesel and fried food. By late afternoon, the sun was dipping behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the road. I turned onto a narrow, winding route that the GPS suggested as a shortcut. It was barely 2 lanes wide, flanked by dense forests on both sides, the trees so tall they seemed to lean in, forming a canopy overhead. I remember thinking how serene it was, how untouched, like I was driving into another world. The quiet, however, was deceptive. About 20 miles down the road, my headlights caught something in the woods, a figure, standing unnaturally still by the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but the shape was too upright. My pulse quickened. I slowed down and squinted. It was a man, tall, wearing what looked like a long, dark coat. His face was obscured either by shadow or a hood. For a moment, it felt like he was looking right at me, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. Then, as I blinked, he was gone. Just like that. I chalked it up to fatigue or the play of light and shadow, forced myself to laugh it off, and kept driving. The road soon became worse. The asphalt cracked and littered with potholes. The GPS recalculated several times, taking me deeper into the forest. Around 8 p.m., I passed a tiny, dilapidated gas station with a flickering neon sign that read, "Open 24 hours." The pumps looked old and unused. I pulled in, hoping to stretch my legs and get a soda. The door creaked loudly as I entered. Inside, it was dark, dusty, and smelled of mold and stale coffee. Behind the counter sat a man, pale, almost gaunt, with thick-rimmed glasses. His eyes were lifeless, staring at nothing in particular. He nodded once when I said hello but didn't speak. I grabbed a soda and paid with cash. The coins seemed to make an unnaturally loud clink in the tin box behind the counter. I left as quickly as I could. By the time I got back on the road, the night had fully taken over. The forest swallowed the road entirely. The GPS now showed a straight path, but the road curved unpredictably, almost as if it were avoiding something. That's when I noticed the fog. A dense, low-lying mist began creeping across the road, rolling in from the trees. My headlights barely cut through it. Then I heard it, the faint sound of tires crunching on gravel behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a car, its headlights dim, but I could see it following me. I sped up slightly, thinking maybe it was another traveler but the car matched my speed, staying just a few car lengths behind. Panic started to gnaw at the edges of my mind. I considered stopping, but something deep inside me said not to. As the miles dragged on, the road twisted tighter and tighter, and the fog thickened until it felt like I was driving blind. Then the headlights behind me disappeared, only to reappear in my side mirror. Closer this time. My breathing became shallow, my hands gripping the wheel. I realized I had no idea how long I had been driving, no idea where the road even led anymore. The GPS signal was gone completely. It said no route found, which I swear I had never seen before. Then, the car slammed its horn, a harsh, grating sound that made me jump. I instinctively swerved, hitting the gravel on the side of the road. The vehicle behind me did the same, matching my every move. It was no accident. It was deliberate. My stomach turned over. I floored it, hoping to outpace whoever was behind me, but the road had other plans. A curve brought me directly in front of a fallen tree, blocking the path. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding across the gravel. The car behind me stopped too, just inches from my bumper. Then, headlights off. Silent. Still. I sat frozen, heart hammering, staring at the dark windshield of the unknown car. After a few minutes, I forced myself to drive again, finding a narrow gap beside the tree large enough to squeeze through. I didn't look back. The next stretch of road became worse, the asphalt turning into dirt and then into mud from a recent rain. My tires slipped, and I had to stop a few times to push the car out of ruts. By now, it was well past midnight. The forest was alive with noises, owl calls, rustling leaves, and something else. Footsteps, I thought I heard something moving just beyond my headlights, always at the edge of vision. Every time I turned, nothing was there. The headlights of the car behind me never returned, but the feeling of being followed remained. I decided I had to find somewhere to stop, somewhere that wasn't just trees on either side of the road. After what felt like hours, I saw a faint glow in the distance. Relief surged through me as I approached. A small roadside motel, the kind you imagine from old horror movies. Neon flickered the name, Maple Shade Inn. I pulled in and parked. No cars, no one at the front desk. The door to the office was slightly ajar. I stepped inside. The smell was the worst I had ever encountered. Stale cigarette smoke, wet carpet, something rotting. I called out. Silence. The desk drawer was open, papers scattered, an old key hanging loosely from the lock. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but exhaustion and fear pushed me to take the key and claim a room. Room 7. As soon as I entered, I noticed how cold it was. The air conditioning was on, but it hummed oddly, like the machine itself was straining. I shut the door, locked it, and tried to settle. Then I heard it, the softest sound, like someone dragging their nails along the wall outside. I froze. The sound moved along the corridor, stopping outside my door. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to catch any hint of voice or movement. Nothing. Then came a knock. One, slow, hesitant. My heart sank. I told myself it was the wind, that I had just imagined it. But the knock came again, then a whisper just beyond the door. You shouldn't be here. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the phone to call the front desk. No signal. I tried the motel Wi-Fi. Nothing. I was trapped. I sat in the room for what felt like hours, listening. Every few minutes, a knock, a whisper, a scratching on the wall. At some point, I must have dozed because I woke to complete silence. The room looked the same, yet everything felt wrong. I noticed for the first time the mirror opposite the bed. In its reflection, I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, tall, dark, with the same indistinct features as the man on the road. I blinked. He was gone. I backed away slowly, every nerve screaming. That's when I noticed the closet door slightly ajar, the shadows inside shifting. I didn't open it. I didn't want to see. I grabbed my backpack and ran, leaving the door open, and headed toward the car. The parking lot was empty. No car behind me. No lights on in the motel. As I started the engine, I noticed something on the windshield. A single smudged handprint, large, dark, as if pressed from the inside. I wiped it off, shaking, and drove into the night. The road back to the main highway seemed endless. I was on high alert, scanning every curve, every tree line. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the woods on the left side. Not the same man, but a woman this time. Pale, long hair covering her face, standing perfectly still. I swerved sharply to avoid her, tires skidding. When I looked in the rearview mirror, she was there too, standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, watching me pass. Hours later, I finally reached a small town with gas stations open and people moving about. I stopped, shaking uncontrollably, trying to gather my thoughts. I asked a local about the back road I had taken. They stared at me blankly before saying, "That road's been closed for years. No one drives through those woods. Some say people who do, they never come back the same." I forced a laugh, convinced I must be losing my mind, but the lingering dread in my stomach told me otherwise. I spent the next few days in a nearby motel, waiting out the storm of fear that had overtaken me. Every sound, every shadow outside my window made me jump. I couldn't bring myself to drive back the way I came, so I waited until daybreak and took the interstate. It was uneventful, dull, normal. Yet, even as I returned home to Austin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. At night, when the lights were off, I sometimes thought I could hear scratching at the windows, soft knocks at the door. Shadows that didn't belong moved across my walls, and always in the back of my mind, I remembered that handprint on the windshield. Months passed, and I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare or the product of stress and exhaustion. But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Driving through those woods wasn't just a wrong turn. It was stepping into something that exists alongside our world, hidden in the dark, waiting for those who stray too far from the familiar. And I knew, deep down, that it hadn't stopped following me. One night, I received a text on my phone, unknown number, blank message. I replied asking who it was. Nothing. Then hours later, a photo. My car parked exactly where I had left it in front of the motel, but the lot was empty. And in the driver's seat, a figure I recognized, face obscured, hands resting on the wheel. I couldn't move. My heart raced. The figure raised a hand and tapped the glass, slow, deliberate. A single knock. I deleted the photo. I turned off my phone. I stopped answering the door. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see those trees, the fog, and the road that isn't supposed to exist anymore. I hear the footsteps behind me, the scraping, the whispers, and I remember the motel, the handprint, and the figures in the corners of my room. I tell myself, but in the back of my mind, I know that some roads once taken never truly let you go. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can see headlights in the distance, far away, but moving closer. Story the end.